Chapter 230. The darkness that suddenly descended within Frost River reality was like a curtain that covered one's face. Theoretically speaking, ability users with extraordinary powers and special forces equipped with exoskeleton armor would not be affected by the darkness. However, an atmosphere filled with malice and murderous intent followed the arrival of the darkness. Feelings and such were fabricated. They floated in the air, but the restless negative psychic pressure was real. The group of people from the society did not know the range of the darkness for now. However, they could personally feel the urgency and impatience within the darkness. The more it was like this, the more they needed to be steady. Under He Yuan's deployment, Luonan was surrounded by the special forces armed with guns and shields. He advanced sideways, but his speed was not fast. Maintaining the formation was his number one priority. Ghost Thunder and the other Ablatum Knights advanced with all their might. The distance between the two sides rapidly closed. Every Ablatum Knight was equivalent to AC+ rank awakened. They were infinitely close to the architect level. Overall, they followed the consistent logic of the order and cultivated strictly. The power they possessed was more focused, direct, and tyrannical than ability users with outstanding personalities. Moreover, there was a natural tacit understanding between them. When the four Ablatum Knights turned their attention to the Society's team at the same time, their malice intertwined with each other and blended with the darkness. It was like an incorporeal and brutal evil beast that roared soundlessly. At this moment, the format pyramid on the bodies of Xue Weiluan, his father, and the special forces shook at the same time. They were like candlelight in the wind, nearly extinguished. All of the attacks followed the flow of energy and information. Several firecrackers exploded on Luonan's mental plane. The attacks on the mental plane disturbed the structure of his body and soul. Luonan's feet were a bit messed up. Then Cat Eyes and Shuele grabbed his arms one after the other. They supported him as he moved. Cat Eyes did not say a word. Shuele whispered, "Nanster, are you okay?" Luonan shook his head. The enemy's response was very decisive. They immediately changed directions and advanced. They coordinated with the power outage and used the darkness to launch a powerful attack. It was filled with the feeling of planning. The faintly discernible feeling of discomfort that had been present ever since he left the luxurious room appeared once more. But this time, the feeling of indescribable inexplicable had lessened. The constellations circling within his mental senses were clearly revealing something. Luonan used a brand new perspective to analyze this dark and subtle hidden information. The most fundamental purpose of drawing the life sketches was to come up with a new explanation of the world in a dimension that was most suitable for him. He wanted to establish an axis and establish rules. Because of this, when Luonan drew these life sketches and pieced them together to form a marvelous starry sky, large amounts of chaotic information no longer rushed at him like a swarm of bees. Instead, they revolved around each constellation, interacting with each other. Only after a buffering and combing process was Luonan able to selectively extract the information. Such a model was also very crude. Compared to the feedback he received when his soul left his body in an out-of-body state, it was even more inferior. Many meaningful details would certainly be left out, and there would be a lot of redundancy at the same time. But in the end, it was an effective method of explanation, and it was most suited to Luonan's reality. It didn't matter what sort of secret methods the other party used. As long as they were effective against Luonan, Luonan would be able to sense them. Naturally, there would be a new explanation for them on this star atlas. They would be incorporated into Luonan's rules, making it convenient for him to finally trace the source and lock onto the target. Originally, the information was very vague, but as the four Ablatum Knights advanced like a hurricane, Luonan's mind was filled with warning bells, and he was able to see things more clearly. In his eyes, the darkness was the background of the profound void. Dozens of constellations and hundreds of thousands of stars were circling back and forth. Now they were rapidly approaching and clashing with each other, bringing an unprecedented brilliance to the star map that had been relatively still. It formed an interesting contrast with the restless negative spiritual pressure on the plane of reality. Everyone's life sketches were different. They appeared in the form of constellations. Some were simple, some were complex, some were clear, and some were blurry. Zhang Yingying and Cat Eyes were simple and clear. He already had a relatively deep understanding of them in the past. He Yuan and Bai Xinyan were powerful and their configurations were exquisite and exquisite. With his current level of analysis, there were naturally more areas that were vague and ambiguous. As for the four Ablatum Knights represented by Ghost Thunder, they were strong and had deep enmity towards him. It was even more difficult for them to draw it clearly. Within Luonan's mental senses, the four knights, one in front and the other three at the back, were like four balls of nebula dust that had exploded in deep space. They came pouncing over. The collision on the star map level was a bit faster than the collision on the plane of reality. And when the two sides of the blurry chaos collided, the nodes and lines that were originally not very clear were purged of the dense fog. They suddenly became much clearer. As the star map changed, He Yuan, who was protecting the flank, issued an order, "White salt, cover." Just as her voice fell, the ceiling above the pitch-black sky exploded with a rumble. The decorative planks shattered in the explosion, turning into shrapnel that splashed in all directions. The special police officers were well trained. The shield-bearers raised their shields at the same time, blocking the space above them. Clanging sounds rang out for a time. There were even a few popping sounds of explosions mixed in with the subtle cracking sounds of the shield structure being damaged. The explosion-proof shields could block the inner ring, but they were useless against He Yuan, Bai Xinyan, and Zhang Yingying, who were roaming around the outer ring. Zhang Yingying was fine. She took 2 quick steps to the front and evaded it. The remaining 2 were within the range of the explosive shrapnel, and their reactions were completely different. Bai Xinyan's movement speed did not change at all. It was just that a cold wave suddenly rose from her body, sweeping through the air. Any shrapnel or explosive lightning was instantly frozen. Even the corresponding kinetic energy was stripped away. They rustled like snow falling to the ground. Such an unscientific spectacle nearly made the eyes of the special police officers pop out of their sockets. Only now did they understand the meaning behind He Yuan's so-called cover. As for He Yuan, she did not retreat when the cold wave flooded the darkness. Instead, she advanced. Her figure could still be seen with her first step. Her second step was blurred and distorted. By the time she took her third step, her figure had completely disappeared. Only a brilliant arc of light sliced through the darkness. And the arc of light was already 30 meters away. Right now, the average distance between the 4 Ablatum Knights and the team was only around 40 meters. Right now, He Yuan had clearly killed her way to the front of the enemy's pouncing formation. If she was even the slightest bit sluggish, there would be a fatal risk of being attacked from all sides by the enemy. But the arc of light was far too fast. They didn't have the time to truly worry about anything. The brilliant arc of light suddenly flashed and extinguished. Practically no sound could be heard as the arc of light flickered and extinguished. But a certain constellation immediately fell apart in Luonan's perception on the star atlas. It dimmed and disappeared. It was only at this time that the people with the sharpest ears were barely able to hear the sound of blood splattering within the dark air. Shuelei drew a cold breath to the side. A kill in 10 steps. Cat Eye's voice was hoarse within the encrypted channel. Ghost Thunder killed confirmed. The channel was a sheet of silence until He Yuan issued a new order. 12 o'clock direction. Accelerate. Following the order, Zhang Yingying, who was in front, did not utter a word. She turned around and sped up. And at the edge of the darkness where the team met, He Yuan's figure appeared. She continued to protect the flank as if nothing had happened before. If there was any change, it would be that she shot a glance toward the center of the formation. Her target was not Luonan but Shuelei, who had just lost his voice. Chapter 231. Luo Nan paid no attention to the minute changes around him. His entire mind was focused on the changes in the star atlas. The instant He Yuan killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash, she also cut open the layer of hazy nebula dust surrounding Ghost Thunder. Before Ghost Thunder died, his constellation finally appeared clearly. Even though it soon dimmed and disappeared, the internal structure of the constellation was still a good reference for Luo Nan to analyze the other Ablatum Knights of the same order. In the blink of an eye, Luo Nan's star atlas became much clearer. Correspondingly, the obscure and unclear external force that was exerted from the void became harder to hide. Luo Nan could see from the star atlas that the force was secretly interacting with the assault formation of the 4 Ablatum Knights. However, Ghost Thunder, who was at the front, was killed with a single slash. The force, which was still being deployed, was thrown into chaos. It struggled a few times before it finally scattered. Oh crap. Luo Nan began to worry for the other side. The force was actually quite considerable, but it leaned towards the mental plane. In order to be effective on the material plane, one needed to find a more suitable entry point for interference. Therefore, it had not been able to truly move down. It just circulated and spiraled, accumulating power in preparation for a thunderous strike. In terms of judgment, awareness, and techniques for accumulating power, He Yuan was 1,000 times more professional than Huang Bingjin, who had been shoved into a corner. However, the other side clearly had bad luck. It was not easy for them to have the opportunity to interfere through the use of the 4 Ablatum Knights. However, He Yuan's frighteningly powerful slash had struck their weak spot. They had probably already suffered a backlash, causing the accumulated power to collapse and scatter in all directions. It was not a big deal for this considerable power to scatter, but it was a disruption to the overall situation of Frost River reality. The special police officers around Luo Nan were clearly wearing thermostatic exoskeleton armors, but they were shivering. They were affected by the corrosion of this scattered power. But soon, the nearly extinguished format pyramid on everyone's chests lit up once more. It was repaired and perfected, cleanly expelling this inexplicable chill. Your reaction is quite fast this time. Bai Xinyan gave a light praise in the channel. She took the opportunity to ask, your body is fine, right? Is there a time limit to the blessing of the Shield of Truth? It should be fine. Luo Nan responded casually. Most of his mind was still focused on the star atlas. The timely addition of the format pyramid's augmentation wasn't due to his fast reaction. Instead, it was because he was trying his best to maintain the star chart that he had drawn with great difficulty. Why was Luo Nan worried for the enemy? It was all because the effects of the energy dissipation were too annoying. In the next few seconds, Frost River reality was a scene of chaos. The trapped citizens were already terrified and restless in the darkness. They were swept by this power that was brimming with negative psychic waves. Their mental defenses were about to collapse. For a time, screams and wails rang out in Area A. Even when the gunmen went on a killing spree, it was not as miserable as this. If the hearts of the people became unstable, the life sketches would also be affected. Luo Nan had been mulling over whether or not he should give a boost to everyone within the range of his senses, but it was too late in the end. Stabilizing the souls of almost 100 people and sorting out their auras in the midst of the rampaging negative spiritual waves was beyond his ability. In the end, the star map couldn't help but shake violently. Luo Nan felt that all the stars were trembling. There were many phenomena of displacement. The structures that had appeared before were all deforming. This destroyed nearly half of Luo Nan's efforts. Damn it. Luo Nan could not help but curse. What's going on over there? Shui Lei's gaze glanced at He Yuan a few times. In the end, he could not help but ask in a low voice. Right now, his ears were filled with screams and wails. He could not stand this atmosphere. He would rather have a few powerful enemies jump out and fight with his life on the line. But at this time, the Ablatum Knights were intimidated by He Yuan's ghost-like blade techniques and the collapse of the augmentation behind them. They hesitated to move forward, and the team advanced incomparably smoothly. Luo Nan shook his head, temporarily dispelling the vexation in his mind. He sent a message in the encrypted channel, comforting Shui Lei and reporting the situation of his observations. It's nothing for now. It's just that someone is up to no good, but Secretary He Slash caused a backlash. His power has gone out of control. He can't cause any substantial damage. There were no more than 3 people in the entire team who could truly understand Luo Nan's words. However, no one doubted Luo Nan's words anymore after his successive highlights. Instead, they were affected by his train of thought. Most of them guessed and pondered. And at this time, Cat Eyes reported, my range of perception has been affected. Right now, it has a radius of 38 meters. Mr. Luo? He Yuan immediately looked for Luo Nan to confirm. Luo Nan did a rough scan. Though the star atlas had yet to dissipate, the range of his perception was not greatly affected. The positions of every ablatum knight were within his grasp. He immediately said, "My side is fine." Zhang Yingying jumped out, "How much is fine? 80 meters?" The number Luo Nan reported was the same as before. In fact, the radius of his perception on the life plane had already broken through 120 meters. And it was still expanding at a pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. Oh, hold on. Did I make a mistake? Luo Nan's train of thought suddenly deviated while Zhang Yingying was still sighing with emotion. How strange. The more I look at you, the more I feel that your all-encompassing perception is abnormal. Why are you always able to see things that others can't? Is it because of the psychic's abilities mixed in? The level is very high. The perspective is different. Cat Eyes gave Luo Nan a rare positive evaluation from the side. And this was the result of her constant observation. The direction of application is different. Bai Xinyan joined in the discussion. Cat's long-range perception is closely coordinated with her body technique. Student Luo Nan seems to be more focused on pure observation. Of course, it's easier for him to be disconnected. Yes, the direction is different. Luo Nan suddenly responded. Cat Eyes needs to make a timely response to all changes within the range of her perception. Every detail needs to be clear. And I don't need to consider other problems. I just need to make a choice between precision, range, and level according to the observation requirements. It's fine. There was no way to continue this discussion. Zhang Yingying looked up at the sky and rolled her eyes. This is the strangest thing. So it turns out that your family's mental senses can be adjusted at will? You make it so that the tens of thousands of ability users who have cultivated painstakingly, pondered carefully, and finally found the most suitable soul frequency with great difficulty. Just like this, the millions upon millions of ability users who have fixed the direction of mental enhancement, how do they feel? The discussion in the encrypted channel came to a screeching halt. Luo Nan didn't know that he had instantly ended a topic. Right now his heart was filled with relief and joy. Sure enough, communication was the best way to solve problems. If it weren't for this, he would still be madly sprinting in the wrong direction. It's too thin. It's too narrow. When he drew his life sketch, there was a problem with the direction of his focus. Just like when drawing, the most taboo was to dig into the details and highlight the parts. Right now, he was unable to project his limited mind into those inexhaustible deep layers of configurations. Even though the star atlas was chaotic and endlessly turbulent, not a single one of the ablatum knights or the trapped civilians could escape his clairvoyance. In the end, that obscure and unknown power was locked onto by his observation. This wasn't because he had dug into the sketches in great detail. Instead, it was because he had grasped the overall composition of the area of perception. He could observe its general outline and know its direction. It was enough. He didn't dig into the details. He looked at the overall situation. He was able to observe the entire domain of interference between the mental and material planes. He was able to observe the entire plane of life. Chapter 232. In order to understand the whole, one must first see. Simply see. Luo Nan's previous clairvoyance mode could not break away from the pattern of the old explanation. He had to honestly expand his domain step by step. He had to consider the body's ability to endure and process enormous amounts of information. But after changing to a new explanation, it was still a sketch to begin with. It was a general impression of the whole. It was a recreation of one's feelings and memories. One only needed to grasp one or two characteristics of life dynamics and use simple brushwork to synthesize them. This was the difference between sketching and sketching. It was the difference between meticulous brushwork and freehand brushwork. Luo Nan summarized life sketches into sketches and configurations. Sketches should be the first. This was the core of the whole train of thought. It was the true direction of application. Before the composition of the whole was confirmed, no matter how real the details were, they could be distorted and absurd when viewed as a whole. Just like the chaotic star atlas outside his body right now. The whole. The whole. Luo Nan emphasized to himself in a hypnotic manner. He closed his eyes, opened them and then closed them again. Through this method he forgot all of his old-fashioned modes of observation. He let his thoughts and consciousness expand outwards, to higher heights, to further places and to wider places. At this moment, the range of his clairvoyance was like a contracting and expanding heart. It was like the rising and falling tide. Contracting, expanding, rising, falling. The frequency of the conversion grew faster and faster. The range of conversion grew larger and larger. Suddenly, some indescribable limit was broken. It was like a great river bursting its banks, overflowing in all directions. It was like an iron mold shattering. There was no longer any fixed pattern. There was an instant when Luo Nan felt that his body and soul were about to scatter into the void. Only when the dark chains trembled and the power of the "My Heart's a Prison" format appeared did Luo Nan retract. It was also in this instant that the range of Luo Nan's mental senses recovered to the peak value of his out-of-body state. It reached 800 meters. In a few breaths of time, the radius exceeded a kilometer and it was still expanding. The entire Frost River reality, including the 3 buildings that supported the amusement park, and even some of the surrounding areas were all within the range of his clairvoyance. Blurry constellations appeared one after another. Everyone within Frost River reality was not limited to the people by Luo Nan's side. This included Fairchild, Baze, the 7 Ablatum Knights and nearly 100 trapped citizens. Then there were the people outside of Frost River reality. There were even the police officers on the 3 bearing buildings. There were tens of thousands of spectators. There were stars as bright as diamonds in the constellation system. There were also shadows that were hard to see. There were even dark clouds that were hazy and turbid. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects and it was difficult to analyze them. Although he didn't try his best to depict it, there was a wonderful connection between motion and stillness, between inanimate objects and life, between the known and the unknown. Light and shadow intertwined. Light and dark corresponded. Illusory and real interacted with each other. Under their interaction, the boundaries between each constellation, shadow, and dark cloud gradually blurred. They intertwined with each other, but their trajectories were clear. The Dharma and Logos were in harmony. Finally, they turned into an endless winding galaxy that spread out. Without a doubt, this was the most profound and vast picture Luo Nan had ever drawn in his entire life. It contained layers and mysteries that were hard to fathom. If it was possible, Luo Nan really wanted to be intoxicated by it. He wanted to ponder over every detail. But today he would no longer sink into it. He just used an independent, transcendent, wondrous perspective to capture and draw the outline of the structure of this star river. Overall, it was more appropriate to use the word star river to describe this feeling. It was as if Luo Nan was standing at the center of an enormous galaxy. The starlight was sparse in the area he was in, but 3 enormous and bright spiral arms unfolded in his surroundings. These arms accurately represented the number of living beings in Frost River reality and the 3 buildings. However, there was a hazy dark cloud entrenched at the top of each of the 3 spiral arms. It blocked the starlight. The 3 dark clouds were connected to each other, outlining a turbid domain of darkness. The domain pressed heavily above the star river. There were even many penetrations. It was difficult to see the true appearance of the inside. There was no doubt that the 3 dark clouds were where the secular first oblatums of the Order of Justice were located. Looking at the current situation, Luo Nan's previous judgment was probably correct. The 3 first oblatums were all here. Yes, the most important target of tonight had been found. The range of Luonan's mental senses continued to expand. Only when the limit of the range exceeded 2 kilometers did the expansion show signs of weakening. The enormous picture of the galaxy had already covered 3 prosperous blocks. The highest point was the high-altitude traffic layer, and the lowest point was the enormous underground drainage system of the city. There were tens of thousands of life sketches that represented living beings, and it was hard to count the number of stars. Of course, from Luonan's perspective, the pure void and inanimate objects were merely meaningless shadowy regions. Unless he was willing to expend a great deal of energy, transform his mode, and deliberately observe with clairvoyance. At this time, Luonan felt the pressure once more. The stars affected each other and acted upon each other. In the end, an enormous tension was formed in the depths of the river of stars. It also formed far too much redundant information. In addition, the greater the size, the greater the level of contact and the amount of information received would naturally increase. Even if he didn't actively sense it, the enormous life level of Xia City's metropolitan area was like a myriad of galaxies in the deep sky, shining light over. Luonan pondered for a moment. He took the initiative to reduce the radius of his senses to 1,500 meters. Then he continued to shrink it back. In the end, it reached a kilometer or so. It just so happened to include the entirety of Frost River reality and the conjoined skyscrapers within it. Now that it had stabilized, there was enough margin left. The brilliant Milky Way flowed silently, the light of the stars parted, and the shadows shifted. Luonan maintained a vague and subtle connection with the faintly unending starlight projection in the distance. As the range of his clairvoyance was determined, the expanding power was retracted. His detailed senses began to become more sensitive, and the interaction between them began to fine-tune. It even spontaneously affected the subtle discordant areas. Luonan didn't need to observe it directly to tear apart many areas of chaos. However, the dark clouds located at the top of the 3 skyscrapers were still thick and stable. It was hard to observe them. Well, at least 2 of them were like this. As for the other one, there was an excessive accumulation, but there was a lack of thickness. Why was it a bit familiar? Luonan had a plan in mind. He temporarily withdrew his mind and naturally reached into his pocket. His mind was free of distractions. He completely forgot that his arms were being held by Shuele and Cat Eyes. He didn't manage to reach the right spot. His forearm swung down and he swung it far away. He smacked a plump and elastic spot and there was a faint sound. Cat Eyes instantly turned her head to this side. Even though they were in the darkness and the brim of her hat covered them, her eyes still flickered with a cold light. It was so piercing that Luonan couldn't help but squint his eyes. However, the most important thing was to take out the object. Though his hand felt like the fabric of his pants, it wasn't his pocket. Luonan was rubbed twice nearby, but he was unable to pull his arm back. He could only speak to Cat Eyes. "You let go. I'll take the object." At this moment, Luonan seemed to feel Cat Eyes tighten her grip on his arm slightly. But in the end she didn't say anything. She just let go of his hand. Luonan finally reached into his pocket and took out the metal box. He weighed it in his hand. Cat Eyes' hand noiselessly returned to his arm at this time. She continued to support him, and she spoke in a husky voice that was rarely heard. "Do you need help?" Luonan looked at Cat Eyes once more. Her eyes were still as bright and cold as before, but there was an unfathomable curve to the corner of her lips that was blurry in the darkness. Her lips hooked up slightly. It was quite contradictory, but there was a novel feeling that Luonan had never felt before. Luonan looked at her, and he had the urge to immediately pick up his brush and draw. Chapter 233. Break it? The cold light in Cat Eye's eyes dimmed. She was a bit suspicious. You're not going to use it as evidence? Luo Nan blinked again, but he had already drafted a script in his mind. He said, yes. I suspect that this toy has been tampered with. The enemy has used it to establish a snake nest and lock onto our position. Many people raised their eyebrows as soon as he said this. Luo Nan's words had violated He Yuan's request. His words had entered the ears of others. But no one was paying attention to this right now. Is that so? Zhang Yingying turned her head in curiosity. Think back to the previous time. If the secretary hadn't killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash and affected the enemy's methods, they might have already made their move. At least this is what I feel. Luo Nan relied on the little bit of credibility he had just established to speak without thinking. In the end his logic was a mess. But now there were people who believed him. Zhang Yingying's eyes went wide. Then why haven't you thrown it away yet? We have to break it first, right? Humph, Fairchild gave this to you. If he comes back and denounces you, will he? Luo Nan's astonished expression defeated everything. Zhang Yingying waved her hand. Forget it. Since you say so, watch me. Her voice had just fallen when a clear sound rang in everyone's ears. It was like the trembling of a wind chime. It was pleasing to the ear and heart. Luo Nan's hand trembled slightly. He saw this rather thick metal box silently split into two halves. A weak electric flame flickered and then disappeared without a trace. The split was right above his thumb and forefinger. A bit of cold air seeped into his skin. It was as if a sharp and invisible blade had cut across his skin. Luo Nan could not help but stare with wide eyes. His body sank a bit. There was absolutely no problem with applying for a severed limb. No need to thank me. Zhang Yingying beamed and waved her hand. Still not throwing it away? It should be fine. Luo Nan was speechless towards Zhang Yingying. He just replied without thinking. But his mind stirred and he added, I don't know who the first to blade him was. It looks like he's pretty average. Ghost Thunder's death completely severed the subsequent changes. Zhang Yingying could not help but roll her eyes. No matter how average he was still a clear oath first to blade him. In terms of strength he was able to crush everyone here except He Yuan and Bai Xinyan. Just as these words reached the tip of his tongue, a flat voice rang out from the side. Of the three first ablatems of the Order of Justice in Xia City, and Qingli is probably the one whose words are truthful. He's the youngest and he relies on his ancestors. His great-uncle is in Wang. And Qingli? Just as Zhang Yingying was about to interrupt, He Yuan coldly shot her a glance and pointed at her earlobe. Clearly he was reminding them not to violate his request and chat casually. What a double standard. The boss is the boss. Zhang Yingying sent a thumbs-up emoji in the encrypted channel, her sarcasm overflowing. Luo Nan was very surprised. He looked stupidly at He Yuan. No one should have understood the purpose of what he had just said, but He Yuan had cooperated seamlessly with him. If that person was really in Qingli, then the effect of those two sentences would be many times better than his. He Yuan turned her gaze over and gave a slight nod. Luo Nan did not have the time to think in detail. His mind stirred slightly. He looked at He Yuan, but on the plane of his splendid galaxy form, the dark cloud that he had locked onto long ago surged. It had already lost its steadiness and now it was surging and churning. Although its aura was astonishing, it could not compare to the other two majestic and solemn performances. Moreover, this dark cloud was splitting off streams of turbid undercurrents. They rushed in the direction of Frost River reality and seeped down. Luo Nan already felt a chill while the dark cloud was still circling and accumulating energy. The other's target was this place. Their malice was clear, but they were clearly impatient and angry. The color of their emotions appeared within Luo Nan's clairvoyance. The matter could not be delayed. Luo Nan casually tossed away the metal box that had already been cut in half. His mind scattered into the surrounding dark air. The metal box contained the consumables needed to create the human-faced arachnid. It was useless to take it out by itself. It would only dirty his hands. But as long as he had a matching computer and printer, he could form complex and clear written materials. Luo Nan was probably the best companion in this small area of Xia City. At least from the current situation, the Order of Justice's research on the human-faced arachnid was not any deeper than his. The ink was currently drifting away into nothingness. Other people were unable to sense it, but Luo Nan's soul strength gathered it noiselessly. He needed it twice, but he still felt a bit awkward. His consciousness sunk into the external neuron and he opened the format pyramid interface. Through this interface he could communicate with the Wraith sign, who was several dozen kilometers away. He did not need the Wraith sign to do anything. It just needed to stay there and be a model for him. However, he never expected that the Wraith sign would be captured through the original format pyramid system. He had just set up the Galaxy Clairvoyance system to receive information from the Wraith sign. The range of Luonan's clairvoyance could not reach that far, but it was just as he had sensed before. The larger the volume, the richer the information received. The Wraith sign was not a living being. The depths of its structure were a mass of primal chaos. There was no life sketch to speak of. However, the structure of the primal chaos formed an obscure shadow under the illumination of other starlight and under the pull of the format pyramid system. The shadow was projected over a great distance. The power of a simple projection was too small. It could not be of much use, but it was a very good model. Luonan originally just wanted to follow the structure of the Wraith sign. He wanted to copy it and make a low-level imitation. But this way he simply threw the consumables into the projection. This way it would be an authorized high imitation, right? It was not that simple to duplicate the human-faced arachnid. Huang Bingjin followed the methods of the order and collected the so-called consumables. They were merely of the lowest level. The current Wraith sign was too lazy to even glance at them. No matter how high an imitation was, it was just a likeness. Its functions were simplified and its power was ordinary. But Luonan felt that it was enough. Not long after, a human-faced arachnid that was closer to the original form of the burning Wraith floated in the air. In terms of efficiency, the Order's methods were far inferior. Aside from Luonan, no one could see the human-faced arachnid right now. The mental plane was endlessly deep and had many layers of structure. It was like layers upon layers of dark curtains. From the human-faced arachnid, it was the best hiding place. Even Cat Eyes, who specialized in perception, or even He Yuan and Bai Xinyan, would find it hard to reach the deeper regions. But Luonan's mental senses were able to probe the deeper regions from the very beginning. He was completely different from other people. Perhaps it was because his mental senses were purely for the sake of observation? Under the control of Luonan's consciousness, the low-level human-faced arachnid noiselessly infiltrated the void. Not long after, it followed the spiral arm of the galaxy and arrived at the edge of the surging dark cloud. The light of emotion still flickered within the dark cloud. Luonan thought back to last week. When he faced Jack, the Wraith sign had taken out a method that left a deep impression on him. The fellow had transformed into a piece of information, a bit of emotion. It had seeped into Jack's thoughts, pushing forward layer by layer, all the way to the depths of Jack's soul. Clearly, the human-faced arachnid had a similar instinct. Luonan did not have high expectations for the low-level version. It was fine as long as it could enter and transmit information. The human-faced arachnid swayed outside the dark cloud. It faced the light of emotion within the dark cloud and charged headfirst into it. Chapter 234. Luonan had no way of doing anything after the low-quality imitation human-faced arachnid entered the dark cloud. He could see how it operated on the level of human energy and information, but it was very difficult to operate it. It was the same as throwing a listening device inside. Whether or not it would be effective depended on a bit of luck. Right now, the spiral arm of the dark cloud was smeared with complex emotions. It was like a swaying poisonous mushroom, but it was not completely transparent. Luonan felt that it was still lacking a bit. He needed to wait. Luonan did not place all his hopes on the human-faced arachnid. His attention returned to Frost River reality. The battle between Fairchild and Baze was not that loud. Luonan often forgot about their existence. It was hard to imagine how these two experts, who were proficient in body techniques, fought. However, when the Galaxy Clairvoyance system was set up, it was impossible for Luonan to ignore it even if he wanted to. This was because the brightest cluster of stars was right there. This was a very interesting phenomenon. The most eye-catching constellation in Luonan's life sketch was that of Fairchild. Luonan wanted to successfully analyze Fairchild's super strength. It was an impossible task. However, Fairchild had revealed to Luonan the profundities of the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. Fairchild's body was grand and imposing. There was little concealment, so Fairchild's life sketch was clearly displayed. It was obviously impossible to simplify it to the level of Cat Eyes. However, its structure was complex and it lit up many stars. As a result, Luonan could sense an astonishing brightness and sense of existence amidst the splendid galaxy. It was because of Fairchild that the 8 Ablatum Knights, including Baze, were affected. The nebula dust that covered their bodies would be torn off from time to time, exposing some of the deeper mysteries. Luonan pondered. Through this, he could use it as a reference to pry into the Order of Justice's first ablatum. He just needed a bit more time. But at this time He Yuan issued a new order in the encrypted channel. 1 o'clock direction, 50 meters. Go through exit number 3. Luo Nan and the others who had been moving forward discovered that they had unknowingly arrived at another exit of Frost River reality. This exit was connected to the bearing building. They could enter Block B of the connected building from here. In other words, they would be able to leave this dangerous area that they had been in for a long time. Zhang Yingying, intelligence leading the way, couldn't help but say in the channel, "Hey, there were still 3 to 4 groups of people in the order that were not under control." He replied, "Yulon Hotel has confirmed that it's the sniper team. Luo Nan already killed them all, teams in the 3 surrounding buildings. There are at least 10 people inside the 3 buildings." Zhang Yingying had been curious about this question for a long time. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, "What's the point of killing the gunmen? First ablatums and ablatum knights are the real deal. The gunmen will cause more civilian casualties." Hey, you're saying that a secret-bound first ablatum and 2 clear-sworn first ablatums are no match for a few gunmen? For now, yes. After a few consecutive questions and answers, Zhang Yingying was very dissatisfied with He Yuan's answers. Just as she was about to put in more effort, the Red Fox, who had not appeared in the encrypted channel for a long time, suddenly interjected. The direct interference of the mentally enhanced with the material plane is rather limited before becoming an extraordinary. The direct killing power of a mental storm may not be comparable to a metal bullet. And the first ablatum's weapons are currently at Frost River reality. They are under Fairchild's control. This makes it very difficult for the first ablatum's energy to deviate by a large margin. He Yuan continued Red Fox's message. Right now there are at least 30 to 50,000 citizens in the 3 buildings. These people can't take fright. If a stampede were to occur, the consequences would be unthinkable. To accomplish this, the gunmen just need to pull the trigger. And we can't afford to pay this price. Luo Nan had to admit that He Yuan and Red Fox's words made some sense. However, the 2 of them had just been bickering with each other and now they were singing the same tune. How could the other people who had their own standpoints endure this? Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed. Compared to He Yuan and Red Fox's train of thought, his thoughts were a bit too presumptuous. Even if he drew out the life sketches of the 3 first ablatums, it would not be of any substantial help in resolving the current situation. Then should he adjust and search for the gunman? But this would require a large increase in the precision of his senses. Luo Nan realized that he might not have this ability. While Luo Nan was thinking about his own conundrum, Zhang Yingying's thoughts were more practical. How long would it take to circle the 3 buildings? He Yuan answered as if it were a matter of course, "We are only responsible for building B. The military will be responsible for buildings A and C." The encrypted channel was immediately shocked. Papercut asked, "The military? The military is personally taking action? Oh right, that flying shuttle just now." Zhang Yingying also shouted, "I knew it. How could there be such a coincidence? You were the one who gave the order to prove Ghost Thunder, right? Did you use your personal connections?" He Yuan herself had a solid military background. This was no secret in the society. However, aside from her military accomplishments, she rarely displayed her personal connections during her time in the society. This sudden mention really caught people off guard. He Yuan did not immediately respond to this question. Zhang Yingying would not let her go. "Hey, wouldn't bringing in the military complicate the situation? Secretary He?" He Yuan was 2 seconds late. Then she said, "It's official cooperation." He Yuan no longer paid attention to this topic. She directly said, "Enter building B in half a minute. Red Fox, Bamboo Pole and Papercut are still responsible for Yulon. Pay attention. According to the requirements, we need to deal with the gunman within 300 seconds. A countdown interface was added to the encrypted channel at the same time the information was transmitted. Right now there were only 295 seconds left. The sudden addition of elements made everyone stunned. Papercut was faced with this unreasonable mission. He said in astonishment, "We'll need more than this amount of time to run back." Right when he was doubtful, Red Fox turned around and left without a word. Bamboo Pole pulled him and sped up to catch up. It was as if Papercut had just woken up from a dream. He increased the force of his feet, but he still wanted to ask, "It's not even 5 minutes. What if we can't do it? We'll implement the emergency plan in 285 seconds. It's impossible to predict what will happen when the time comes. Speed up." He Yuan urged the team to advance quickly. At the same time, she laid out the next steps of the operation. After Special Police Squadron 2 enters Building B, you will be responsible for guiding and maintaining order. Everyone else, with the floor you entered as the boundary, Mr. Luo, Yingying, and White Salt will form a team and head down. Cat Eyes and I will form a team and head up. Quickly search and deal with the gunmen. Contact them at any time. After 270 seconds, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, we will immediately descend from a high altitude and leave the range of the triangular building complex. Every time she mentioned the number of seconds, it was in coordination with the countdown interface. She reminded everyone that the arrangements were constantly consuming time. The group of people were doing their best to digest this information when Yuan specifically said to Luo Nan, "Mr. Luo, you must focus your energy. Don't get distracted." Luo Nan was stunned when he heard the hidden meaning in her words. But at this time he faintly heard a piece of information. It seemed to be a sigh of regret, but it also seemed to be a mockery. Chapter 235. Luo Nan's mind suddenly slanted. This piece of information that had no head or tail did not originate from any member of the team. It did not seem to be directed at any member of the team either. It just soared through the air and reverberated within his mind. He was stupefied for a moment before realizing that there was progress on the human-faced arachnid side. He clairvoyantly observed the dark cloud above the spiral arm of the Star River. He could clearly feel that the density of the dark cloud was decreasing. More and more blurry starlight was reflected. There was even some energy information that was deciphered and analyzed through the human-faced arachnid. Those few words did not seem to be the real-time dynamic of a conversation. It was more like the intense obsession of a certain person's heart, causing the relevant information to grow and accelerate endlessly. It looked like the person within the dark cloud was in a bad mood. He raised his head to look up. Through the metal frame and the transparent glass ceiling, he could see the silhouette of the pitch-black and lightless tall building. It was vaguely similar to the dark cloud in his senses. In reality, the group of people were rushing towards a dark cloud. Moreover, it was the target that Luo Nan was targeting. The color of the light was constantly changing, nearly turning into a poisonous mushroom. Or maybe it was a coincidence. Luo Nan's gaze locked onto a corner of the building. He could not see any clues with his naked eye, but he could feel the malice hidden deep within the air on the mental plane. It grew clearer and clearer as he got closer. Even though Yuan had warned him not to get distracted, what if he was under the interference of a first ablatum? Luo Nan sent a message in the encrypted channel. "It seems like we're being watched. It's that fellow who talks too much." Yuan's reply was filled with the flavor of a matter of course. "As long as we're in one of the 3 buildings, we'll certainly be watched by at least one first ablatum. Don't worry. Don't get distracted." This was the second time Yuan had warned him. Right now Luo Nan's feet were practically not touching the ground. He was being carried by Shuelei and Cat Eyes as they sprinted through the connecting passageway. Shuelei moved close to his ear and said, "You didn't arrange for me just now. You must follow Uncle?" Yuan suddenly asked before Luo Nan could finish speaking. "Has Shuelei already obtained the talisman? I just made small progress in the past 2 days." Shuelei was suddenly stunned. He turned his head to look. "You know?" Yuan didn't respond. Instead, she issued another order in the encrypted channel. "Shuelei and Mr. Luo will be in a team. According to the time limit, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, you must quickly leave the vicinity of the building." Shuelei didn't say anything, but Xue Weiluan was startled. Just as he was about to speak, a message flashed through the encrypted channel. "Hey Sister Nun, it seems like you're using awakened ones as your criteria. Is this some sort of arrangement by the society?" The one who sent the message was Bai Xinyan, but there was no response from Yuan. Xue Weiluan's words were blocked by this message. In the face of a completely unknown background, making wild guesses and suspicions was one of the worst things a special police officer could do. It was the same for his father's identity. At this time the group of people had already entered Building B. The special police formation automatically dispersed. Cat Eyes flashed out of the group and stood together with Yuan. Zhang Yingying pulled Bai Xinyan over. She grabbed Luo Nan and Shuelei. "Do you know why you need to concentrate?" The 2 high school students shook their heads. "What happens next will be very exciting." Zhang Yingying blinked. She was just about to say something when she saw Xue Weiluan walking over. She shut her mouth and walked to the side with Bai Xinyan. Luo Nan also hurriedly stepped aside, giving the father and son some time to talk. However, the conversation between the father and son of the Xue family was much more straightforward than they imagined. The 2 men, who were both equally majestic, hugged each other heavily. Even though there was a thick layer of exoskeleton armor between them, it didn't matter. Do your best. Be careful. There wasn't much time to talk during the continuous countdown. Before their voices could fade away, the glass wall adjacent to the entrance shattered with a bang. The glass fragments flew down and a gale whistled in. Zhang Yingying looked down. The slope is okay. It's not the straight up or down type. At that moment, Xuelei could feel his father's arms tightening around him. He grinned and broke free. Don't worry. Zhang Yingying turned her head to look. Xuelei has tried descending from a high building before? Xuelei maintained his confident smile. The gym master taught me the jumping ape technique. I've also practiced a bit of extreme parkour. I've tried it on a high floor, but the distance wasn't very long. Excellent. Zhang Yingying gave him a thumbs up. With a burden like Luonan, White Salt and I will definitely have to spend a large amount of energy on him. You need to be careful. It's time for a martial artist to crush a mentally enhanced dregs. Zhang Yingying was halfway through her words when a figure flashed by her side. Yuan and Cat Eyes practically leaped up shoulder to shoulder. They braved the gale and leaped into the dark void. Their figures flipped and they flew up. They only left a message in the encrypted channel. Hurry up. They didn't have the chance to carefully plan due to the urgency of time. At this time, it depended on whether or not their daily habits were efficient. Right now, the power outage of the building and the elevator were out of service. They wanted to complete the entire journey in less than 4.5 minutes. According to the society's usual practice, they relied on the skills of ability users to play fast ascending and descending. Yuan didn't choose Luonan to go up. This fellow's terrible physical skills were probably one of the important reasons. Zhang Yingying shrugged. She wasn't in a hurry. She knew from the moment Yuan arranged the mission that the intensity of this group's mission was much easier. The specific plan of action naturally had to be sent to the encrypted channel. Luonan's sensing radius is 80 meters. Building B's width is around 150 meters. Just make a spiral around the building. If everything goes smoothly, we only need 100 seconds to set foot on Fudong Main Street. Luonan was astonished. That's fast. I won't be able to lock onto the gunman in time. The terrain and angle of the lower floors are meaningless. The possibility of a gunman is too small. The secretary just wants us to retreat. Are you ready? Me and the big guy will go first. Xuelei shuddered. The confident smile on his face was a bit stiff. But no matter what, he couldn't let others, especially his father, see this. It would only cause him to worry. He silently recited the mnemonic that the gym master had personally taught him. Transform the water and fire into a discipline. He began to encourage himself. I'm different from normal people. I'm really different. Qin Xiaolin's face miraculously flashed in his mind. Then it dissipated like a bubble. The yin and yang within his body rose and fell. His body, which had been eroded by the gale within the darkness, recovered its warmth. The little bit of hesitation and absent-mindedness melted away into nothing. Xuelei was even more certain that he was born for this sort of scene. He tilted his head slightly and locked gazes with Luonan beside him. This was the friend who had drawn him into this wonderful world. The two punched each other. Let's go. As Xuelei shouted, he leaped into the dark void outside. Zhang Yingying also leaped out of the building at practically the same time as him. Then came Bai Xinyan, who was holding onto Luonan's waist with one arm. Xue Weiluan followed closely behind them. He stuck his head out to look and just happened to see his son. His son was more agile than any ape or monkey. His long arms slapped the glass wall a few times to borrow strength. It was as if he was riding a skateboard as he flew all the way down. Several figures quickly disappeared into the curtain of night. Chapter 236. At the center of the rooftop of Building B, a gear-like structure hummed as it revolved. It constructed an intricate and marvelous formation. Rays of light weaved together like a cocoon, wrapping in Qingli within. With this layer of cover, and Qingli could no longer hide his ashen face. He ground his teeth heavily. His thoughts were completely on the building beneath his feet. He was on the damned members of the society who made him feel as if his heart and lungs were on fire. As a sworn first ablatum, he could be considered a mentally enhanced in a certain sense. However, his mental senses were never his forte. He needed to use the divination domain to lock onto a target several hundred meters away, separated by several dozen layers of reinforced concrete. However, as long as his consciousness existed in the divine play domain for a moment, and Wang's evaluation seemed to linger in his mind. How unsightly. And Wang's words were as light and subtle as usual. They were worth pondering. But this time, The most superficial meaning was enough to make Qingli feel as if he had been slapped in the face. His entire face was wooden. He stood within the magic array, but he felt as if he was imprisoned in a cage. The gazes of the surrounding people turned extremely strange. Actually, the priests and members of the order were far from being able to access information from the divination domain. It was very difficult for them to know what the first ablatums were doing and what they were communicating with each other. However, Qingli still felt terrible. He had a feeling that Wang's words had spread far and wide. Correspondingly, his performance as the judge personally appointed by Wang had spread far and wide. This was completely different from what he had imagined. He had never thought that this half-grown child named Luonan would be so thorny. Other things aside, Luonan's soul strength was extremely thick. Most importantly, it formed its own system. The so-called format pyramid appeared to be illusory and indistinct, but it was like a layer of irritating curtains. It acted as a buffer for penetrating power on the mental plane. And Qingli had tried to use his power time and time again, but he wasn't confident that he would succeed in one strike. He could only keep accumulating power. He hesitated for a long time, waiting for the military to activate the ghost bomb with great difficulty. And Qingli then took advantage of this opportunity. He used the Ablatum Knight as a carrier to find an opportunity to kill the enemy in one strike. But who would have thought that just as the accumulated power was about to take effect, it was chopped off by that damned secretary. He himself suffered a backlash and his soul was shaken. He still hadn't calmed down. The most damn thing was that Luonan and his secretary had mocked him by name after the fact. And this was a one-sided situation where they had guessed correctly about his identity. A great humiliation. If this matter were to spread, then he and Qingli would become an eternal laughingstock in Xia City and even in the Order of Justice. He would never be able to survive. At this moment, Qingli only wanted to avenge his humiliation. The people from the association had already passed through the connecting passageway and entered Building B. Building B was good, he was in Building B. There were 3 connected buildings. The height of the buildings was around 700 meters. They were connected to Frost River reality in the center. Following the arrival of Luonan's group, the straight-line distance between the 2 sides had already shrunk to less than 400 meters. The enemy had even divided their forces. A heaven-sent opportunity, and Qingli began to mobilize the power of the divination domain. However, just as he started, Wang's thoughts cut in and seized all the authority of the divination domain. The projection of the scales of truth in the center of the Great Triangle forcefully attracted the attention of every officiator. The position of the white scale on the classical pendulum scale was lifted up by a bit, and the black scale correspondingly fell down. It looked like the state of imbalance had been corrected. The winding and rotating posture of the Krite on the black scale was more lively than it was at the beginning. This showed that the ritual had made great progress. And Qingli was shocked at first when his authority was seized, but his face burned when he saw this scene. It was reasonable to say that Wang had personally appointed him to judge Luonan with the ultimate goal of breaking the order that Luonan had formed. He wanted to release the elements of pain and chaos and make the scales of truth reach equilibrium. Now that there was great progress, Qingli should be happy. But the problem was how much of this was due to him. Qingli had been affected by the secretary's decapitation, and most of the power he had accumulated had been dissipated. Although he had frightened the citizens of Frost River reality out of their wits, the chaotic elements of the 100 or so people couldn't be considered a weight at all. What truly affected the scales of truth was the panic of the surrounding citizens caused by the power outage of the 3 buildings. And the reason for all this was because Wang had given an order to the action team. He hadn't used any supernatural powers. And Qingli felt that Wang was a fool when he compared the two. However, Wang wasn't too satisfied with the current situation. It's still a bit lacking. Perhaps I've placed too much of a foundation on the scales of truth. I still need to make up for it. Jing Xiao, who was on the other side of the building, really wanted to ask. Just what was the foundation that Wang had placed? But at this time, Qingli, who was anxious to save face, couldn't wait to say, "Leave it to me, Wang. This time, I will definitely get rid of those people from the society. You only have one chance, child." And Wang's thoughts were gentle and firm. Only those familiar with him knew that the deepest layer of his thoughts was a callousness akin to an iceberg at the bottom of the sea. Mending the pen after the sheep is lost is not a flock of sheep, but a fence. Its purpose is none other than order. As Wang spoke, the scene under the projection of the scales of truth quickly changed. It swept over a dense crowd. These people were scattered across the 3 connected buildings. Because of the sudden darkness, they were bewildered and uneasy. However, as time passed, human instincts to adapt to the environment came into play. The convenient and efficient information system of modern society was also the embodiment of rules and order. As the government sent targeted information to all the trapped citizens and instructed them to evacuate, the panic of the people gradually subsided. Tens of thousands of citizens were evacuated from the fire escape and emergency evacuation exits. In modern metropolises, high-rise commercial buildings were often connected by high-altitude stairs and conveyor belts. They were like long vines that extended and entangled in a primeval forest. This also made it convenient for evacuation during emergencies. At this time, people were flowing out of these tunnels like ants. Due to the proper distribution of information, the overall situation was quite stable. However, this also caused the imbalance of the scales of truth to become more serious. Seeing the white scales move down again, not to mention Jing Xiao, even in Qingli, who hadn't been very focused all this time, couldn't help but divert some of his attention. If the imbalance couldn't be transformed into a balanced state, it meant that the spellcasting had failed. The three of them would suffer a serious backlash. This was much more tragic than the one caused by the secretary earlier. One order, one world. And Wang sighed softly. I like order. Order is the brightest path to the truth. But sometimes we must abandon the low-level parts and replace them with the high-level parts. To use the low-level world as a ladder to the high-level world. And Wang. Jing Xiao felt that something was wrong. And Wang's request to cut off the power to the three buildings was very inappropriate. And according to what An Wang had just said, wasn't it a step further? A step further? What step was it? And Wang's response was clear. Before order there must be disorder. New birth must be accompanied by destruction. Before the thought was extinguished, a dazzling radiance exploded within Frost River reality. The shockwave instantly flattened the glass wall on one side. 7 or 8 human silhouettes scattered amidst the flying shards of glass that filled the sky. They were thrown towards the three connected buildings. Chapter 237. An Wang. Zheng Zhao's thoughts trembled. His emotions were panicked. He wanted to yell at An Wang, "We've completely crossed the line." But then the trajectory of bullets that had happened before could be explained by the fact that they had no regard for the civilians during the fierce battle with the figure holding the gun into pieces. They could even make a countercharge by saying that the enemy's choice from battlefield was unprofessional. The evolution field faithfully transmitted these changes back, forming doing things their own way, directly tearing apart the bottom line of the government's social governance. In addition, they would blindly terrorize and snipers from either the military or the police had different the vagrant organizations as well as sniper robots that had infiltrated the building at some point in time, or even the local powers. Pull the trigger a second time. Many parties would unite to denounce them. Those brainwashed gunmen were originally abandoned assembly, so it was normal for them to absolve them. However, the loss of these few lives was also panicking. His government were similar to Zheng Zhao's, and the association were working together. Once the matter was investigated, team or even the deep blue walkers were already on their way in a place where they couldn't see. The Ablative Knights only needed to carry out the mission, and those gunmen might not even be able to keep their lives. But at this time, his body suddenly quivered. Only he and Jing Xiao would be left to bear the chaos element caused with his previous terrible performance to lean more and more toward a balanced state. Even more losses. It instantly crossed no matter how uncomfortable Jing Xiao and the holy artifact to the situation would not return to zero. As gunfire wildly evolution the dark had advanced, the truly terrifying of the three first Ablatives converged in a certain top the triangular spaceship. And Qingli still did not have any authority, but at least he had become more sensitive. He could sense that the kite was attempting to absorb even more chaos and blue lights of the police lights interweaved together, foretelling the chaotic scene that was to follow. This was not a diversion, nor was it an expansion of the battlefield. Someone was attempting to gather this chaotic region. It was very likely that it would be an unbridled destruction. The image within the evolution field continuously had a bit of friendship sweeping over all the members of the society. He could not help but contact the other side. This included the secretary that understand just what sort of arrangements An Wang had made, as well as Luo Nan, knew that this was about to land. But if he did not understand that the teenager was currently looking up at the sky. However, Baze did not respond. His expression of astonishment was extremely obvious. Calling out, he should have been startled by the intense changes. It was as if his consciousness had suddenly fallen into a layer of ice. The problem was that his gaze was not directed at the ceiling of Frost River reality where the Ablative Knights were currently much busier than you. Instead, it was directed at a higher altitude. For example, maintain silence. And Wang's thoughts flowed within the evolution field. He did not know whether or not became the master of every problem. And however, could only shrink into someone else like a decorative work was enough for him to express this sort of judgment. Only lasted for a short moment. And Wang did not respond. At this time, then the jumping gunfire inside that he did not care about imprinted in many people's pupils. The image was focused on the sky above Frost River reality. This enormous triangular spaceship had become a tattered biscuit that had its insides hollowed out due to the collision between Baze and Fairchild. The 7 Ablatum Knights had already leaped away from this place. Their speeds were fast, and they had already collided with the outer glass curtain wall of the building. The ceiling was completely empty. There was nothing there. But soon the integrated image of information inexplicably shook for a moment. Wondrous ripples even blossomed in the evolution field at that location. It was not an illusion. And Qingli's eyelids twitched. Slight distortions appeared on the magical array constructed from high-energy light beams around his body. Correspondingly, the flow of energy that was originally as smooth as water formed a vortex out of thin air. It was just that the operation of the magical array had nearly entered a fork in the road. While Qingli was distracted, the image displayed by the evolution field switched once more. It pointed at the first of the Ablatum Knights to charge up the building. Qingli remembered that this fellow was Flying Shark. His speed underwater and in the air was first-rate among this group of people. The force of his charge was very strong, and his killing intent was extremely heavy. There was a boom as the enormous glass curtain wall was smashed into pieces by Flying Shark. That fellow must have locked onto the direction before he exerted his strength. There were 20 to 30 citizens who did not have the time to evacuate behind this piece of glass. Flying Shark's extraordinary power was poured into every piece of glass shard that flew everywhere. The fate of those unlucky bastards was probably the same as being shot by a shotgun. The first wave. Qingli could already foresee the scene of blood flowing like a river. However, what appeared in the evolution field next was not flying flesh and blood. It was not miserable whales. It was just streaks of distorted flowing light. Then there was nothingness. Where? Where is he? Qingli's thoughts froze for a moment. After a moment, the glass curtain wall shattered one after another. The Ablatum Knights landed on the building one after another. However, they were faced with an incomprehensible emptiness. There was not a single shadow within the entire building as far as the eye could see. The Krite materialized in the projection of the scales of truth stiffened. Soon after, it melted into the smoke of the plate. The black plate rose up all the way to the top. Correspondingly, the white plate on the other side heavily pressed down. Chapter 238. Luo Nan and the others had just stepped onto the side road of Fudong Main Street when the shockwave enveloped the area around Frost River reality. Just as Zhang Yingying had expected, there were no gunmen on the lower floors. The journey down was easy and pleasant, and it took them less than 100 seconds. They even had the time to think about it a little more. With the shadow of the building, they could quietly descend so as not to be too shocking. However, the actions of the Ablatum Knights above Frost River reality made their cautiousness a joke. Just what is he doing? When Zhang Yingying saw the shockwave that exploded within Frost River reality and the figure that flew out, her usually jumpy train of thought was somewhat unable to hold on. There was nothing strange about a few gunmen dying right after they opened fire and getting rid of them cleanly. Compared to the few Ablatum Knights, they were not even worth a fart. If I had known that this would be the result, I wouldn't have been so hesitant. I would have just taken action. That's for sure, and Wang's brain has already atrophied, hiss. Zhang Yingying suddenly covered her ears and frowned. Half of Luo Nan's brain was stupefied a bit earlier than her. This was probably the most intense tinnitus he had ever felt in his entire life. It rang loudly, making him suspect that someone had fired a gun right next to his ear. He also covered his ears and couldn't help but grimace. What happened? Shuelei was originally immersed in the successful high-altitude rapid descent experience, but he was given a fright by Luo Nan's desperate reaction. Bai Xinyan glanced at the two of them, then lowered her head to look at her wristband. She then shrugged. There's a problem with the encrypted channel. On the screen of her wristband, the countdown stopped at 97 seconds. It's the collapse of the psychic wave network. Zhang Yingying recovered from the initial shock and patted her ear lightly. She had a strange look on her face. I haven't had this symptom for a long time. Is the president doing some extreme experiments again? This is the mission process. Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped talking. At this time, Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward the end of the auxiliary road. Shuelei was a bit hesitant. He raised his head to look with uncertainty. In the end, Luo Nan recovered from his tinnitus state with great difficulty. He blurted out the most crucial words, "Where is he?" In this instant, the brilliant river of stars that Luo Nan used clairvoyance to illuminate was silently extinguished, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. There were only a few dozen stars left, as well as the nebula dust that was even harder to see. Such a strong contrast caused Luonan to be stupefied in place. At this time, Zhang Yingying grabbed his arm to make sure that the two of them were a little closer. Then she looked at Bai Xinyan and the few of them carefully walked out of the side road. At this time the night rain had not stopped. The police lights were on, the street lights were on, and the public transport vehicles were also on. Only the buildings behind them were pitch black. The contrast between light and darkness was strong. However, regardless of whether it was in the light or in the dark, there was not a single person within their line of sight. The entire street, the entire building complex, and even the blurry city under the curtain of rain were all empty and devoid of life. If there were strong people, they would be the Ablatum Knights who had just shattered the glass curtain wall. There was also Frost River reality, where Fairchild and Baze had suddenly engaged in a direct and violent confrontation. There was also the first Ablatum and his subordinates within the three dark clouds at the top of the building. These people took the form of constellations, nebula dust, and appeared on the plane of Luonan's mental clairvoyance. Compared to the vast and resplendent star river from before, the sparseness was shocking. "Oh, I made a mistake." An inexplicable voice penetrated into Luonan's mind, and then the background noise suddenly became rich. A ripple seemed to streak past Luonan's eyes. He let out a cry and his entire body seemed to be electrified. His vision blurred, and the dense starlight and the gloomy void transformed back and forth several times. Only then did it stabilize and return to its normal state of the brilliant star river. However, there were some subtle differences. On the plane of reality, a dense mass of people appeared out of thin air. They rubbed shoulders with one another as they hurried past, submerging the small team of 4. Most of the people were far away from this area. They occasionally turned their heads to look at the pitch-black building, revealing expressions of confusion and suspicion. This was the scene that should have happened in reality. But what was that just now? "Hey, did you see that? Those Ablatum Knights. They're gone." Zhang Yingying's voice suddenly lowered. It was a bit hoarse. "There's also Fairchild and Baze." Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward Frost River reality. There, the impact of the battle had strangely disappeared without a trace. All that was left was the broken outer wall of the building. Luonan added in his mind, and the 3 first Ablatums on the top of the building. "They're on the other side." Bai Xinyan muttered to herself for a few seconds before speaking softly. "It's like a legendary technique like spatial fault. They can intercept a segment of spacetime and replicate it. Or they can use the projection of the world. I've only heard that there are some extraordinaries who flaunt themselves as gods who possess this sort of nearly inexplicable spacetime ability." Spatial fault? Zhang Yingying had heard of this for a long time, but it was mostly in the works of fantasy. She could only spread her hands. Right now, the only known extraordinary in the entire city is the president. The gazes of the two beauties, each with their own characteristics, locked. Zhang Yingying subconsciously reached out to touch her ear. The encrypted channel had yet to be restored, and the chaos of the psychic wave network continued. However, as long as one wanted to understand the situation, one could still use the primitive method of using a wristband. Zhang Yingying began to make calls. She wanted to find someone to clarify things. Fault? Luonan, who was next to her, naturally heard the conversation between the two women. He blinked and his consciousness flowed, permeating through the void. The brilliant star river of his clairvoyance was still the same as before. There seemed to be nothing abnormal. However, after the experience he had just experienced, the greatest abnormality was that there was nothing abnormal. Due to the appearance of the spatial fault, the Ablatum Knights, Fairchild, the 3 first Ablatums, and the other members of the Order of Justice were all swallowed up. These people no longer existed on the plane of reality. Regardless of whether or not this was the work of that person, this change should be reflected in Luonan's mental senses. It was just like when he first entered the spatial fault and instantly sensed the change. However, the reality was that regardless of whether it was Fairchild's magnificent and dazzling constellation, the nebula dust of Baze and the other 8 Ablatum Knights, or the dark cloud formed by the 3 first Ablatums, all of them remained within the star atlas. There was just an additional layer of indescribable layers. The reason for this was that although Luonan's body had come out, his consciousness, or at least a portion of it, remained within the spatial fault. It carried out the work he was most familiar with. Observation. Luonan was simultaneously observing 2 worlds. They were independent of each other, yet they overlapped with each other. A brand new dimension was opened within the 3-dimensional structure of clairvoyance. It was a feeling that defied all human experience. It could only be sensed, but it could not be described. It was extremely bizarre, yet brilliant beyond compare. This was especially true when the two worlds, which appeared to be completely identical, overlapped with each other in reality. This gave Luonan an additional angle of observation. The dark cloud of dust, which was originally chaotic and unclear, became much clearer. Even though it was still difficult to refine a life sketch in the form of a constellation, it was still possible to draw an outline that was not too different from each other. It was more distinguishable from each other. And so, the dark cloud that affected observation gradually thinned and split apart, revealing the true faces of the three first oblatums of the Order of Justice. Soon Luonan found the one with the highest status. It was an old man wearing loose robes. He stood in the middle of the landing platform of Building A. His figure was thin and withered. He looked old and clumsy. Needless to say, this was Wang. Although he was trapped within the spatial fault, this old man did not show any signs of anxiety. He just smiled and sighed with emotion. Doing things that ordinary people are unable to do is called extraordinary. Ouyang, compared to you, I really am old and decrepit. And Wang, you praise me too much. As Wang spoke, a middle-aged man appeared on the rooftop of the building Wang was in. He wore a black suit that seemed like he was about to attend a banquet. He stood about 10 meters away from the century-old man and bowed slightly to show courtesy. Chapter 239. Ouyang? President Ouyang Chen. Luonan finally understood He Yuan's meaning. No wonder she didn't consider the strong members of the order at all. So she was waiting here. He had never truly seen Ouyang Chen before, but he had heard of this division president who taught ability users with the theory of internal logic, invented the hexaear, and established the psychic wave network. Ouyang Chen's name reverberated like thunder in his ears. Now that he saw Ouyang Chen face to face, he felt that Ouyang Chen's image was quite consistent with his expectations. He didn't feel unfamiliar at all. And Wang and Ouyang Chen were even more familiar with each other. They had both been in Xia City for many years, keeping each other in check. The number of interactions between the two was even greater than the number of members and followers they had. This old man, who was already over 100 years old, raised his head to look at the night sky, which was no different from before. He muttered, "The logic world. I remember that you once discussed a similar concept with me. I was asking for guidance." Ouyang Chen was still modest and low-key. But I refused. And Wang reminisced about the past and was rather emotional. Clergy and researchers are the same. They both yearn for the truth, but we won't place holy objects on the experimental table. We will always have a forbidden zone. Reverence or fear. In short, we must avoid it. But researchers are different. You can trample on the holy domain at any time. Ouyang Chen listened quietly, not refuting. But as an extraordinaire, just by standing there, he made everyone on the landing pad, other than Wang, feel uneasy. Actually, when Wang and Ouyang Chen's conversation was transmitted to the other two first oblatums through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao and Qingli reacted as if they had swallowed a bomb. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and Qingli groaned, "This guy came out of the laboratory. He must have crossed the line. Oh shit." And Wang laughed, "Ouyang, my children don't understand you. They don't understand your work." Ouyang Chen's gaze flitted across the complex light diagram around Wang's body. Just like Wang, he raised his head to look at the sky, deep in thought. He did not immediately respond. Wang quickly withdrew his gaze. He was like an old friend, a senior, analyzing Ouyang Chen's actions. "You have never been an inventor. You are a theoretical researcher. You grasp a question and you will research around it until you form a valuable system. For example, when you set up the psychic wave network, others only saw the convenience, but I knew that you were researching the soul, researching mental energy, and researching the existence of the mental plane relative to the material plane. You wanted to figure out where the power that distorted reality came from." Ouyang Chen looked at the old man's mottled face and replied calmly, "This is what I've been pursuing. According to your church, it is the source of the world's revolution. Oh yes, the gate of truth is open." The fact that Wang had so easily said the keywords made the two first oblatums' scalps tense. Was it really this old man who had not hesitated to shed all pretense of cordiality with child and pushed for the strategy of repairing the plank road in the open and crossing the Tsang in the dark? I feel like we are all a joke. On Zheng Zhao's side, Qingli once again contacted him through a private line. There's definitely something wrong with that old man's brain capacity. Or perhaps he simply doesn't take us seriously. We should think of a way. Zheng Xiao suddenly could not hear anything. This private line of communication had been inexplicably severed. At the same time, An ice-cold and penetrating intent cut through his nerves within the evolution field, slowly grinding them away. And Qingli's situation would only be worse than his. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and then opened them again. There was no doubt that the old man had always known about this private line of communication between him and Qingli. He just turned a blind eye and let them play around. Perhaps Zheng Xiao should rejoice. Even in private communication, he had never spoken ill of Wang out of caution. But at this moment he was not only worried that the old man would dig up old debts, but he was also unable to understand why Wang had suddenly expressed his attitude in such a frank manner. What was the meaning behind this? Unbeknownst to him, Zheng Xiao's attention turned to the core of the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth. The unbalanced state continued, but Zheng Xiao noticed that the white plate, which had been pressed down to the bottom, had lifted a little at some unknown time. The crite that had materialized on the black plate had also begun to recover its vitality. Then where was the opposing chaotic element? Zheng Xiao seemed to understand something in a daze, but the pressure on the mental plane had risen once again. It was ice-cold and heavy, making it impossible for his thoughts to go any deeper. The conversation between Wang and Ouyang Chen was as warm as a spring breeze. No matter what, I can feel your accomplishments. Ouyang, you are attempting to redefine the laws of the material plane. Ouyang Chen shook his head slightly. If such a form truly exists, I hope that it can be reproduced. But up until now, all I have been able to do is create a plausible model, a tiny instance. At the very least, this is a battlefield where I can freely move my hands and feet. It is enough to reduce the impact on the secular world. Look, Fairchild and the others are having fun fighting. While Wang was speaking, Frost River reality was finally unable to withstand the bombardment of the two powerhouses. The connection between Frost River reality and Building A broke. A large half of the structure fell down. Fairchild and Baze's figures flew up at nearly the same time, smashing into Building A's body. Immediately, an even more powerful shockwave swept out. The glass walls of over 10 floors above and below were shattered with a loud rumble. Glass flew down like rain and the entire building seemed to shake. If this was the plane of reality, the casualties of the surrounding citizens would be in the hundreds or thousands. But now there was not a single person in the building. Even if it was completely demolished, it would not matter. The only thing they had to worry about was the church members on the rooftop. The confrontation between Fairchild and Baze grew more and more intense. Although Wang had taken the initiative to bring it up, his gaze was focused on Ouyang Chen for the majority of the time. He was extremely focused. Wang? It really is a very good design. Wang stared at Ouyang Chen and nodded slightly. You have maintained a very high degree of independence. You are mostly borrowing the existing objects of the material plane. The consumption is not much and the pressure you endure is not great. It is hard to imagine that this is a flawed product. Ouyang Chen smiled in response. So the possibility of it collapsing due to overload is very small. Wang does not need to think in this direction. Wang could not help but laugh when his thoughts were exposed in a single sentence. Ouyang, since you clearly know that this is an unsuccessful work, why don't you continue researching it? Stay in your laboratory and concentrate on it. Ignore the disturbances of society and let it proceed according to the established method. Wang, I am doing it according to the established method. Chapter 240. The rooftop was silent for a few seconds. Wang began to shake his head. Ouyang. Your current appearance is far from being as convincing as the results of your experiments. Ouyang Chen maintained his gaze. Wang. Other than the teachings of your religion, no one can feel your sincerity. Wang's shriveled mouth opened wide. His surprisingly neat and pure white teeth cracked open into a crack. A low and hoarse laugh came from within. This is nothing. The affairs of the world are not driven by our exchanges. The decisive element is not truth or lies. It lies in the established facts. Ouyang, from the moment you establish the logic world, Xia City will not operate because of our attitudes. Do you want to make a bet? Ouyang Chen seriously considered it for a while. In the end, he sighed silently. I've only cut off the channel to gather chaos elements. I thought that the people at the first level of your order's first oblatums had already abandoned methods such as sacrificial sacrifice. Wang was still fine when these words were spoken, but the other two first oblatums on the rooftops of the other two skyscrapers looked as if they had been hit in the head with a stick. Zheng Xiao was speechless. He already had a premonition, but he was just suppressing it. Now that he was clear-headed, the impact was much smaller. And Qingli was the one who had truly been hit awake. He cried out involuntarily, What sacrificial sacrifice? And Qingli's telepathic thoughts had already cut into the evolution field before his voice faded away. He had never been an idiot. It was just that the consecutive setbacks in a short period of time had caused his mind to not be clear. He received Ouyang Chen's reminder, and looked at the changes in the projection of the scales of truth. The crucial point that he had overlooked before finally appeared clearly. We are in a spatial fault. The two worlds are separated. There are no more panicking citizens. Where does the element of chaos come from? How could he have forgotten such a simple logic? And Qingli's gaze swept over his bewildered subordinates. He then looked at the diagram of light outside his body. Cold sweat poured down in Qingli's body. He wanted to reach out, but he discovered that he was still under Wang's punitive restraint. He could not even move a finger. But at the same time, the power contained within his body was tightly combined with the diagram of light outside his body. Layer by layer, it was extracted and flowed into the evolution field. Since he was casting a spell, consumption was a must. In addition, Qingli had suffered a backlash earlier, so he felt rather weak. He wasn't too sensitive to the loss of strength in his body. It was also because of this that he did not realize that the amount of power he had extracted recently had already far exceeded what was required for normal spell casting. Over half of the magic power he had accumulated over the years had unknowingly been extracted. Without a doubt, all of this power had become the weights on the scales of truth to correct that damned unbalanced state. More than half of the power had been lost, but the speed of extraction was still increasing. And Qingli couldn't help but curse, "Old man, you're crazy." As the curses rang out, light and shadow fluctuated between the three buildings. The evolution field went from formless to tangible. It appeared in the void, revealing everything. The rest of the symbols and images were nothing. Everyone's attention was focused on the giant scale in the center. The black and white plates, one above and one below, revealed the crucial imbalance in front of everyone's eyes. It could be seen that even though the current situation was still white below black above, the trend was that the white plate was slowly rising while the black plate was slowly sinking. The difference in weight between the two sides was gradually leveling out. Of course, the price was the loss of power from Qingli, Xiao, and even Wang. Why did you choose me? Why did you choose me? And Qingli was unwilling to accept this. The sacrifice of the spellcaster would certainly be shared by all three of them. But the current trend was that he would be the first to fall. What? It must be known that he was Wang's grandnephew. He was younger and had a brighter future ahead of him. He couldn't compare to Wang, but he should at least be a bit stronger than Xiao, right? Was it because he wasn't a good judge? Was it because he wasn't able to get rid of Luonan? As Qingli was struggling with all his might, Xiao's telepathic thoughts cut through the evolution field. Wang, just what kind of substrate did you choose? And Qingli suddenly shuddered as if he had just woken up from a dream. Yes, who was the substrate? This substrate, that had never appeared on the white plate, was the one that determined the upper limit of the element of chaos. If the problem with that substrate was lower than the combined power of the three first ablatums, then Qingli could definitely save it. Just as this thought arose, the image within the evolution field switched. What appeared should be a certain place within the building. That place had just been flattened by the shockwaves of the collision. Fairchild wore a white robe that was still spotless. On the other hand, Baze, who was stronger than Fairchild, was like a runaway rhinoceros. His body was flung into the air as he charged at high speed. He smashed through the glass curtain wall and fell toward the bottom of the building. Baze would not die from the fall from this height, but it was destined that it would be very difficult for Baze to tangle with Fairchild for the time being. As for the other Ablatum Knights, without Baze as a shield, charging forward was meaningless. Fairchild raised his head and looked up. The evolution field just happened to give him a close-up. This Ablatum Knight clearly sensed the attention of the evolution field. His gray eyes turned to the side and pointed at the dusky void outside the building. His figure suddenly rose in the next moment. He leaped out of the window, stepped on the building, and flew straight up. It would not take him much time to reach the top of the building. Truth above. Whether it was the furious and panic-stricken Qingli or the relatively calm Xiao, the two first ablatums nearly suffocated after confirming Wang's intentions. An uncontrollable despair engulfed their souls. It was Fairchild, the powerhouse, who was just below extraordinary. He was the target that Wang had found. Of the three first ablatums, the strongest was Wang. However, he was already old. No matter how powerful his mental cultivation was, his fleshly body could collapse at any time. The remaining two added together might not even be able to compare to Wang. Purely in terms of blood energy, Could 2 and 1 compare to the ears of truth? Clearly, they could not. Since that was the case, if they could not gather enough chaos element, the unbalanced state of the scales of truth would truly suck them dry. When that time came, the first one to die would be Qingli. No, no. And Qingli's mind was restless. His strength was drained even faster. He tried to call out to his subordinates. Seeing his current crazed appearance, there really were a few trusted aides who wanted to rush over to help. But halfway there, Wang sighed. He extended his hand from his voluminous sleeves and used his thumb and forefinger to form a triangle. His other 6 fingers crisscrossed to form a seal that corresponded to the evolution field. It doesn't matter if you're stupid. What makes you feel helpless is to expose yourself without the slightest scruple. And Qingli's mouth gaped wide open. His eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Just as his eyes were about to tear out, the evolution field's hidden defensive mechanism silently activated. Rays of light crisscrossed over the bodies of several of Qingli's trusted aides. Dark flames rumbled and ignited. From the outside to the inside, from the inside to the outside, they burned through these people. Yet they could not die quickly. Their hands and feet danced amidst their wretched screams. They fused their terror and despair into the flames. The flames reflected in their companions' eyes and penetrated deep into their hearts. The evolution field clearly displayed this scene. The flame soared, but it was as cold as ice. The priests and knights of the order were frozen on the spot. And Wang did not say it clearly, but the meaning behind his words was very clear. The 3 first ablatums added together were no match for Fairchild. But if they used an even more intense method and used even more people to burn their offerings, wouldn't that be enough? On the projection of the scales of truth, the plate was still moving at a leisurely pace. The element of chaos continued to accumulate, but should he hope that it would slow down a bit? Or should it speed up a bit? At this moment, Qingli was truly at a loss as to what to do. He followed the instincts of a first ablatum and prayed to the order's sacred object. But Wang was above him like a black cloud covering his head. All he received was an emptiness of despair. Who will save me? As long as I can live, anyone is fine. And Qingli's body stiffened. His consciousness gradually froze. Only a tiny bit of will to live remained amidst the fear and despair. It was like a flickering flame that continued to struggle. The icy darkness slowly descended. The flame slowly sank, growing weaker and weaker. But when the flame squeezed into the depths of his soul and released its final rays of light and heat in despair, it reflected a strange figure that seemed familiar. Chapter 241. And Wang maintained the special triangular hand seal. Dark flames burned within the triangular cavity, spreading to his palms, upper arms and gradually covering his chest and abdomen, all the way to his head. He did not look like a piece of charcoal. Instead, he used a more economical method to extract the essence energy from his flesh and blood bit by bit. He ignited it to unleash 120% of his energy. And Wang was like this. Jing Xiao was more or less the same. With Qingli blocking in front of him, he could maintain his calm for now. But the calmer he was, the more confused he became. For this reason, he used the evolution field to ask Wang, "Is there a need for this? Aren't we just paving the way for the order to enter Xia City on a large scale? Are we still unable to gain trust at this level? Do we really need to sacrifice the lives of a few first ablatums?" And Wang's answer was elusive and hard to fathom. Qingli, this child, only has a clear mind when he is hiding behind someone else. When he spoke of the gate of truth, he asked when and where. This is correct. Only clear concrete information can be considered fundamental. However, the order lacks this right now. So, Wang, you want to verify it? Everything you've done is actually to find this thing that might not even exist? In the end, the order has never verified it, right? Jing Xiao was unable to continue controlling his emotions. Anyone would find it hard to maintain their calm when they discovered that their life might be squandered on a meaningless conjecture. No, that's not right. No matter what direction it was, he cherished his life. It was just that there were no miracles without a goal. He was not willing to give up even the last bit of hope. And Wang seemed to read his mind. We aren't aimless. Remember the human-faced arachnid? Its source. That corporation that uses money to conceal its strange smell. They want to make medicine out of the human-faced arachnid? What kind of reason is that? Quantum Corporation? The Gate of Truth? Jing Xiao was speechless for a time. It was hard for him to connect these two elements that did not match. But Wang firmly believed in this point. His will was incomparably firm. We have already lost the initiative. Right now, we must seize this opportunity back without hesitation. Only we have the qualifications to touch the gate of truth. The authority of truth is destined to be held in our hands. Zheng Xiao suddenly understood why he was never able to increase his rank. Perhaps every single one of the 100 people standing at the top of the order was a paranoid lunatic like An Wang. He was about to give up communicating, but the unwillingness in his heart made his thoughts throb. An Wang. It was also at this moment that the centenarian opposite him used the most efficient method to say to him, "Pray, child. Pray that the gate of truth." Or, as the Holy Bible says, under the thick clouds on the island covered in boiling magma, demons carrying chains on their backs pass through the clouds. Order wraps around disorder, and disorder devours order. Perhaps we will find a corner of the clouds, and there will be a powerful demon that the Holy Bible says will cross the sky and take our place. To hell with the demons. To hell with the Holy Scripture. Holy, holy God, gate, holy gate. And holy devil. Holy evolution. Seize. Demon. In the creation God. And of it. In. And Qingli's thoughts were like a fine thread that could snap at any time. It groaned in the storm. He is more stubborn than I expected. That's good. And Wang was very satisfied with his grandnephew's reaction. On the other side, Zheng Xiao felt a chill in his heart. He sensed something and cast his consciousness toward the center of the evolution field. Unknowingly, the two ends of the scales of truth had formed a horizontal line that was relative to the evolution field's triangular region. 3 first ablatums, 8 ablatum knights, and dozens of priests and knights. Their life force was mixed with the heart of fear and the heart of madness. Together, they fused into a huge amount of chaos element. Especially within Qingli's massive output, at least for the moment, it formed a precious balance with Fairchild. Zheng Xiao opened his mouth but nothing came out. His thoughts projected the last bit of information. But we are still in the spatial fault. An Wang's response was like a placebo. Child, you must be clear. This is an opportunity. An excellent opportunity. As the old man's thoughts became clear, Zheng Xiao suddenly felt his body and soul tremble. With the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth and the 3 first ablatums as the fulcrum, the three-dimensional structure constructed began to tremble and warp. The intertwining effects of power were too complex. It was hard to observe, but the final wave that formed swept across the material plane of the logic world in an instant. At this moment Zheng Xiao saw Ouyang Chen. This theoretical number 1 person of Xia City was frowning. He cast his gaze toward the projection of the materialized scales of truth. This scene did not require An Wang to relay it. All he needed to do was to scan through the spread of the wave and transmit the information back to him. Zheng Xiao gathered even more information. For example, he roughly understood the boundary of the logic world. It was the area where the 3 high-rise buildings were connected. It had a radius of a kilometer or so. But here came the problem. If he was sealed inside, how could he talk about verification? Before he could finish his thought, the frequency of the wave led by the scales of truth could be described as such. A subtle change occurred. Correspondingly, the wave cut into the mental plane. According to the ancient records of the order, the mental plane was like a boundless ocean. It was incomparably vast and incomparably deep. A person's mental consciousness was like a fish. Some could only swim in the shallow waters, while others could swim tens of thousands of meters under the sea. Of course, this was just a metaphor. Metaphors were often miles away from reality. But no matter what, it was extremely difficult to enter the deep sea. The cultivation ancient records of the order roughly divided the mental plane into 5 layers: shallow, intermediate, deep, abyssal, and extreme. Zheng Xiao was the clear-oath first ablatum. Even when he was in his best state, he could only sway at the edge of the intermediate zone. But now, following the rapid change in the frequency of the wave, his body and soul trembled violently. It was as if he had warped and mixed into an ugly, monstrous fish. With a sudden plunge, he entered the deep sea that he had never experienced before. He also received the feedback of a terrifying pressure. Zheng Xiao groaned. He felt as if the muscles and bones of his entire body were severely deformed. His soul was even more warped beyond recognition. Amidst the extreme pressure and pain, a wealth of information was transmitted back to him. But he did not even have the strength to receive the vast majority of the information, let alone understand it. Perhaps An Wang could. Could he really? Through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao could faintly sense that An Wang was not having a good time either. Every change in the frequency of the wave led by the holy artifact was an absolute torment to the body of the centenarian. The damage caused was irreversible. This was verification. Verification at the cost of one's life. Zheng Xiao was not sure whether or not he had heard a sound. Chapter 242. In the end, Zheng Xiao's mind was still clear. The relevant concepts quickly became clear in his mind. You released number 3. He originally did not have the strength to converse with Wang, but seeing this scene his mind surged and he actually squeezed out a bit of energy. And Wang did not respond. He probably did not have the time because at this moment, there was an explosion. The edge of Building A's rooftop suddenly collapsed. A dazzling light leaped up from below like a miniature sun. Fairchild stepped out from within the rippling waves of light. He walked with large strides toward the burning and Wang behind the magic array. 20 meters away, Ouyang Qin gently shook his head. Even this subtle movement was caught by Child. He turned his face and stared at the extraordinary who had been a spectator for a considerable amount of time with his gray eyes. Child's deep voice seemed to be able to shake the air on the rooftop. Do you still think this is a laboratory? In a sense, yes, Ouyang Qin calmly admitted. This logic world is my laboratory. How unfortunate. You let someone crazier than you in. Your experiment is bound to be a mess. Fairchild's footsteps did not stop. As he spoke, he crashed into the automatic defensive circle of the evolution field. Gloomy flames burned around his body, but not a single spark could penetrate the white light surrounding his body. Of course, the priests and knights could go forward to stop him, but the people who were immersed in fear and panic could not muster the courage to do so. Fairchild arrived outside the magic array unimpeded. His movements were still crisp and efficient. He extended his hand and shattered the cocoon-shaped diagram of light into fragments that filled the sky. One of the 3 pillars of the evolution field, and it was also the most important one, had been shattered just like that. Correspondingly, the 2 first ablatums on the rooftops of Building B and Building C screamed miserably at the same time, as if they had lost control of high-voltage electricity. The diagram of light around them twisted and collapsed. Zheng Xiao fared slightly better. He had discovered Fairchild rushing to the rooftop in time. He was mentally prepared. Although the backlash was fierce, it was not fatal. However, on the other rooftop, and Qingli, who was already out of his wits, was not so lucky. Forcefully entering the depths of the mental plane was already too much for him to bear. The backlash from the collapse of the pillar of the evolution field destroyed his fleshly body in the first instant. The splattered flesh and blood turned into burning torches before they could completely disperse. The pain of his flesh being torn apart and being burned incinerated in Qingli's willpower into ashes. He knelt on both knees and then collapsed onto the ground. He rolled around and let out anguished howls, each one weaker than the last. Meanwhile, in Block A, the dark flames around Wang expanded by half a meter. The intensity of the flames had multiplied many times over. His robes and his skinny body were all ablaze. The light of the fire penetrated deep into his body. Through the flames, one could even see the emptiness behind him. But Wang only stood there quietly. He maintained the triangular seal that corresponded to the evolution field. He only raised his face slightly. His eyes were still turbid amidst the flames as they met Fairchild's gray pupils. The moment their gazes met, he opened his mouth slightly and spoke in a weak voice from his already scorched throat. As long as you yearn for the truth, it will definitely be on both sides of the scale. But there is no need to be at the mercy of chaos. Child stepped forward again and punched in Wang's head. The external force of the fist and the internal flames acted at the same time. The old man's head was instantly smashed into fireworks that filled the sky. Child's expression did not change in the slightest when he succeeded in one strike. This was because he knew that the target his fist had shattered did not have much meaning. His fist, which he had yet to withdraw, slightly tightened. An invisible shockwave was launched from the material plane. It charged into the mental plane and penetrated extremely deep. But in the end he was still a step too slow. Some incorporeal shadow leaped out from Wang's burning body and concealed itself in the depths of the void. Child raised his head and his gaze pointed to the center of the triangle formed by the 3 buildings. It was the void directly above Frost River reality. There, the materialized projection of the scales of truth stood amidst the rolling waves of light. The evolution field had lost its pillar and could completely collapse at any moment. But the projection of the scales of truth still appeared to be stable. This was not just the miraculous effects of the holy object. It was the support of a new power. On the rooftop of Block C, Zheng Xiao could no longer stand. He barely managed to control his body and sat on the ground. He looked down in a daze. Within the distorted and turbulent evolution field, the originally malevolent image became even uglier. Before, he had only seen the occasional insect limb. Now, it appeared before his eyes in a seriously distorted posture. Of course, it was no longer an insect. It was a clear demonic shadow. The slender limbs moved within the waves of light. The demonic body of man and arachnid that was one with one clung to the lower part of the projection of the scales of truth. The six-eyed demon eye flickered with light. No one knew who its attention was focused on. Number 3, Zheng Xiao murmured. Number 3 was a human-faced arachnid. The Order of Justice was one of the first powers to clearly set out to search for and utilize the human-faced arachnid. They relied on their first move and accurate information to capture a total of 5 human-faced arachnid clones over the past 10 days. They were arranged according to numbers 1 to 5. After some research and testing, the human-faced arachnid clones devoured each other. There was also a specimen that was sent to the first sacrifice. In the end, only number 3 was left. It was kept at An Weng's place. No one knew what the old man would do. Now, An Weng's head had been smashed by Fairchild's fist. Number 3, who had remained hidden all this time, had revealed itself. Furthermore, it had thrown itself into the collapsing evolution field a step earlier. Zheng Xiao was in a state of confusion. His consciousness, which was still being pulled and controlled by the evolution field, connected with a chaotic and restless power. Human-faced arachnid number 3. Zheng Xiao instinctively wanted to use the method of controlling the human-faced arachnid to secure the initiative. But in the next instant he came into contact with a cold and clear plane behind the chaotic power. The information in his consciousness rippled like light waves. The frequency was so familiar. At this moment, Zheng Xiao's hair stood on end. An Weng? Number 3 did not respond. He could see that its 6 demonic eyes and its ugly head were pointing in a different direction at the same time. It was the rooftop of Building B where Qingli was. In the next moment, number 3 suddenly disappeared from the plane that could be sensed. By the time Zheng Xiao relied on his perception ability, which had yet to be completely withdrawn from the mental plane, to lock onto number 3's position, number 3 had already crashed into the depths of the mental plane. Its target was clear. It covered the rooftop of Building B in an instant. Its sharp limbs pierced downwards. Before the attack could land, another demonic figure soared into the sky from the remains of An Qingli's body, which was about to be completely burned away. It leaped into the void. Zheng Xiao saw it clearly. It was another human-faced arachnid. The spoils of war hidden away. A consciousness suddenly came to him. It was extremely clear. Even though Zheng Xiao was mentally prepared, he was still so startled that he nearly blurted out, "An Weng." The consciousness flashed. In the depths of the mental plane, the 2 ugly monsters collided together. Victory and defeat were practically decided in an instant. Number 3, or rather An Weng, used its nightmarish calicity to shred half of the spoils of war. Then it bit down forcefully, completely swallowing the food that was half in its mouth. In the end, it chewed off the head of the human-faced arachnid, which was indistinguishable from each other. The 2 ugly heads came together and one swallowed the other. The scene of the human-faced arachnid cannibalism had never been as nauseating as it was now. Chapter 243. Disregarding An Weng's actions for the moment, his judgment should be correct. The human-faced arachnid that had appeared on An Weng's body was most likely the spoils of war that An Weng had hidden from the human-faced arachnid hunting operation. Not only did it not provide any help to An Qingli, but it also turned the tables on him when he was in his most dire straits. The spoils of war had undoubtedly absorbed the nutrients from An Weng. But compared to number 3, who had devoured many of its own kind, there was still an essential difference. Number 3 should be able to sense this difference. It wanted to escape with all its heart, but it was still a step too late. Not to mention the fact that the nutrients it had just devoured had been completely poured out, it had become a part of number 3. Zheng Xiao could clearly feel the entire process of the human-faced arachnid's devouring. This was definitely not a good experience. If even he was like this, then what about An Weng? Number 3's actions were very much in line with its ugly outer shell and violent instincts. But if An Weng was added to the mix, then the meaning would be completely different. From Zheng Xiao's perspective, perhaps An Weng could be 10 times more vicious than he was just now, but he would never use such a crude method. He was like a beast with low intelligence. An Weng? Child, are you alright? Zheng Xiao was nearly rendered speechless when his own lines were stolen. But the pressing situation forced him to try. And Wang, I can't hold on much longer. You don't need to. Zheng Zhao's meaning was that he hoped to separate his thoughts from the depths of the mental plane. He hoped that he would no longer be bound to the evolution field and the human-faced arachnid. But Wang's reply was despairing. Child, you are very important. Very important. The evolution field completely collapsed the moment their thoughts intersected. But Zheng Zhao was unable to retract his projected thoughts. It was like a tenacious kite string. One end was connected to Zheng Zhao, and the other end was pulled by the human-faced arachnid that Wang was residing in. It floated in the endless void. This feeling was not unfamiliar. The Order of Justice had long since grasped the method to control the human-faced arachnid. When they conducted experiments, the first ablatums were the controllers. This feeling was very complicated. It was like a combination of walking a dog and flying a kite. Sometimes, the phenomenon of a soul attachment would occur. It was as if one had transformed into a human-faced arachnid and roamed in the depths of the void. Because of his discovery of this phenomenon, Wang had even specially developed an application. It was a faith product provided to large clients, the source of tonight's chaos, the human-faced arachnid exoskeleton armor. But now, it seemed that there was a deep reason why Wang was so concerned about his little invention. Perhaps he had long since anticipated that there would be a day when he would ride a true human-faced arachnid and dive into the deepest depths of the mental plane. After many days of experimentation, Zheng Zhao was very clear that the depth of the human-faced arachnid's dive on the mental plane far exceeded that of the first ablatums. There were 5 types of depths in the spiritual plane: the shallow zone, the middle zone, the deep zone, as well as the abyss zone and the polar zone. In short, they were known as the 3 zones, 1 zone and 1 zone. Those who were not extraordinaries or those who had specialized in B-class and above would find it very difficult to enter the latter 2 levels. Zheng Zhao's limit was the middle zone, and even within Wang's profound spiritual cultivation he could only stay in the deep zone. If he wanted to go deeper, he would need the support of a holy artifact and pay a considerable price. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, staying in the deep zone was the most normal thing. It could enter the abyss zone or even the depths of the polar zone at any time. This sort of zone had already been completely cut off from the material plane. It was impossible for any purely physical instrument to detect its existence. In other words, this sort of dark side of life form completely followed its instincts and its actions. It had no intelligence to speak of. It would often enter the shallow zone of its own accord because of the temptation of food, and react with the emotions and consciousness of people. This gave people the opportunity to capture it. Yes, as long as the human-faced arachnid interfered with an external object, it would inevitably affect the depth of its concealment. The degree of influence corresponded to the depth of the interference target on the mental plane. The closer the depth of the 2 sides was, the smaller the influence on the human-faced arachnid. Zheng Zhao had a general understanding of Wang's current resolute method of doing things. Perhaps he could reduce the influence of the interference to the minimum. He could use the human-faced arachnid's innate talent to search for the gate of truth hidden in the depths of the boundless void. Wang had already begun to move. The marvelous probing waves were transformed by the human-faced arachnid to cut into the deeper depths of the mental plane. Zheng Zhao wasn't too clear about the specific process of probing as a kite string, but there was one thing he didn't understand. Why did it have to search on the mental plane? Was the gate of truth nothing more than an illusory spirit? Just as he was puzzled, Wang took the initiative to communicate telepathically with him. It's a pity, child. I can't pass on my current experience to you. You don't understand how interesting this experience is. What I can tell you is this: don't use the popular analogy of the order to speculate on the truth. The structure of the mental plane, the way the mental and the material interferes, is much more interesting than you can imagine. Of course, I also have to thank Ouyang, thank his laboratory. On the rooftop of Building A, Fairchild turned his face and looked at Ouyang Qin, who had just walked to his side. How long are you going to let Wang corrupt your laboratory? Ouyang Qin loosened his bow tie a bit, allowing himself to enter a more relaxed state. At the same time he became more engrossed. He let out a breath and said softly, "It's true that it's good to reinforce a house when an earthquake is already brewing, but it's impossible to reinforce a city. We need to release a certain amount of energy and sometimes we even need to detonate it. This is what the laboratory does." Fairchild sneered, "You and Wang must get along very well." "I used to." Ouyang Qin did not deny it. Then he asked in reply, "Mr. Fairchild, are you not going to provide some information?" I know nothing about En Weng's plans. I'm talking about the human-faced arachnid. The human-faced arachnid? This dark-sider life form is more marvelous than we can imagine. Quantum Corporation is one way of saying it. The Society's research is another. Of course, there's also the Order of Justice. Is there a place for it in the ancient records of the Order? Fairchild sank into deep thought. He needed to recall and weigh the pros and cons. However, the development of the situation did not give him much time. Number 3, who was floating in the depths of the void, had already switched frequencies for the 5th time under En Weng's control. This time there were some subtle changes. En Weng was not sure what Fairchild saw. He projected his thoughts over with incomparable concentration. However, a more substantial change occurred within Number 3. It occurred in the depths of the human-faced arachnid's inherent chaos. Hualala sounds rang out, like the trembling of a chain. There was practically no pattern to the random trembling, but this sound, that could be sensed and distinguished, was itself incompatible with the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. Chapter 244. En Weng never rejected order, but he wanted it to be under his control. Right now, all of his energy was focused on controlling the probing of the outside world. He was unable to completely take care of the interior of the human-faced arachnid. Even if he did, it would be useless. En Weng had once attempted to sort out the chaotic interior of the human-faced arachnid to form a complete model, but he had failed as expected. This was because chaos was the nature of the human-faced arachnid. It could not be changed. Therefore, he needed to use the kite string that was Zheng Xiao to resist the primal chaos within the human-faced arachnid's body. He needed to maintain his basic rationality so that he wouldn't be completely suppressed by the human-faced arachnid's instincts. But now, En Weng had actually sensed the power of order within the human-faced arachnid's body. He had never doubted the results of his research, so the answer was very clear. An external force had joined the fray. Without a doubt, this power came from the spoils of war. That thing had clearly been shattered by the human-faced arachnid's devouring power, but for some unknown reason, it was pieced back together. Chaos was shattered, and it could only become even more chaotic. The fact that it could be pieced back together meant that its chaos was just a disguise, a brilliant simulation. This reminded En Weng of the conviction product he had just developed. The little thing was a reflection of his thoughts. He had wanted to spend some time combing through it and collecting more data, but Child's appearance had ruined his initial plan. From that moment on, the development of the situation became more and more ridiculous, and now it was completely unrecognizable. Simple recollections were meaningless, but clear content could help people organize their thoughts. Following this clue all the way back, En Weng finally confirmed that his previous judgment had been wrong. That was definitely not some spoils of war. It was a replica. Perhaps it was a product of faith that he had created. As far as he knew, the current owner of that thing had been replaced by a certain young man. From the taste he had just swallowed, that thing was more advanced than his initial version, to the point that it was almost as if it was the real thing. However, En Weng was not surprised. That young man had some kind of unbelievable power of order, and with his special ability, he was able to stop the changes of the unbalanced state time and time again. Ouyang Qin should express his gratitude. Otherwise, he might not have had the time to set up the logic world. However, En Weng also remembered that the young man should have been isolated from the logic world. What a miraculous little fellow. Of course, it was also infuriating. The deviation in the direction of his mind caused En Weng's previous probing efforts on the mental plane to go to waste. He lost that momentary clue that might have led to the gate of truth. However, he did not let emotions like anger take the upper hand. Instead, he directed the probe waves in the opposite direction immediately. En Weng performed a self-examination on the human-faced arachnid, locking onto the elements of order that were incompatible with chaos. He seized the opportunity to push back. Any search and probing would be empty talk if the source of interference wasn't disposed of. The vibrating vibrations of the chains grew clearer and clearer. The corresponding information continued to join and combine, finally forming a dark chain. It twisted and stretched, piercing through the interior of Number 3's chaotic shell. It radiated countless strands of barbs that seeped into every part of the human-faced arachnid. The situation was much more troublesome than En Weng had originally judged. The power of order used this form to declare its invasion of the human-faced arachnid. As for the longer part of the chain, it extended into the depths of the mental plane. Without a doubt, the other end must be contacting that boy wonder. He's called Luonan, right? and Wang's thoughts coiled, forming an incorporeal incantation. He had seen Luo Nan's basic information before. He had used the evolution field to lock onto Luo Nan's aura. This was enough for a secret-bound first ablatum. A highly lethal secret spell gradually formed. He would fire it without hesitation the instant he locked onto his target. He would forcefully blast through the barrier between the mental and the material plane, eliminating the worry of the rear. This was not the smartest method, but it was the most straightforward. Even if this would cause his parasitic soul within the human-faced arachnid to enter a dangerously weak state. And Wang's mind extended out along the chain. With the assistance of the human-faced arachnid, the sealed and chaotic void structure of the logic world was no longer able to block it. And Wang originally had no intention of using this ability on the plane of reality. But now the situation had changed. He roughly remembered the last place Luo Nan appeared before the logic world was erected. He traced the direction of the chain and scanned the plane of reality at the same time. And Wang was confident that he could lock onto his target within 2 seconds. The probing wave smoothly cut out of the logic world. It was hard for Ouyang Chen to control the probing power of the human-faced arachnid. But at this moment, the information that came flooding in from the outside was not the scene of a metropolis. Instead, it was a starry sky that left one in a daze. It was so unfamiliar. And Wang was dazed for only an instant. He soon came to a realization. This was the projection of a certain person's consciousness. He had already made direct contact with Luo Nan. The kid's combat experience seemed to be lacking. He practically had no anti-detection methods in a confrontation on the mental plane. The two sides instantly clashed. Short. And Wang was just about to blast out the secret spell of death, but he had no choice but to stop. He had never imagined that the scene of a person's consciousness could be this vast and majestic. It was true that the power within was practically non-existent. But this kind of performance in itself was an inconceivable achievement. This was just the reproduction of Luo Nan's perception. He needed to trace back to the origin to find Luo Nan's core consciousness. But behind this starry sky scene were the auras of countless living beings. They appeared here in the form of stars. Together they formed a vast and hazy structure. Plus, the scene formed from Luo Nan's observation and perception was absolutely not just grand. He made full use of the mental plane, including the reality of the logic world. The starry sky looked flat and uniform as a whole, but it actually contained complex and warped details. It was like a maze. As for Luo Nan's core consciousness, it was hidden behind layers upon layers of curtains. It was hard to discern its location. If Luo Nan had truly used his power to forcefully construct the scene, and one could have charged in all directions and relied on feedback to find his target. But in the pure domain of perception, the more one searched, the easier it was to be led by the nose. Also, the environment here was simply like a fragrant soup pot for the human-faced arachnid. Its powerful and terrifying instincts began to stir once more. This diluted in Wang's power. And Wang made a prompt decision. He gave up on probing the plane of reality. He didn't want to waste any more time. He still had the chain. The power of the heavily chained crow was increasing. It had a restraining effect on the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. It made number 3 feel uneasy. And Wang simply strengthened number 3's instincts in this aspect. He let number 3 search in reverse along the chain. No matter what, the master of this chain was undoubtedly Luo Nan. Number 3's probing suddenly came to a halt. This was because at this moment, an absolutely oppressive feeling came whistling from the other end of the chain. The sudden increase in pressure turned the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid into a pot of boiling oil. If the human-faced arachnid possessed consciousness, its boiling instincts would certainly drive it to scream loudly, "Danger! Danger!" A terrifying power of the same origin but different descended with a rumble. Number 3's combat instincts were pushed to their limits. A battle across space erupted in an instant. And Wang's control suddenly fell to its lowest point before the boiling instincts of the human-faced arachnid. He was like a small boat bobbing up and down amidst the roaring lava. He could capsize at any time. The situation was out of his control once more. He suddenly understood. The one at the other end of the chain was absolutely not Luo Nan. It was a damned human-faced arachnid. An extremely powerful one. Chapter 245. The instantaneous spatial perception was quite clear. The distance between the two human-faced arachnids was extremely far. At the very least, it far exceeded the limits of the normal senses between human-faced arachnids. In other words, this was a collision that should not have occurred. Then was this a trap? A trap specifically targeted at the human-faced arachnid? A trap targeted at Enwang? Before Enwang could understand the root cause of the change in the situation, the clash between the human-faced arachnids had already entered a white-hot state. The hazy starry sky was filled with the powerful pressure of hostility. Number Three's body was forcefully warped. Every movement was an all-out confrontation between tangible and intangible forces. For this reason, the chaotic power within Number Three revolved at a higher speed. It was like a boiler, crushing and incinerating all internal fuel in order to provide an even more powerful internal energy. From Enwang's perspective, this was simply a calamity. After he abandoned his fleshly body, his soul was placed within Number Three's body, achieving a partial fusion. But in the end, they had not completely fused as one. There was still a considerable portion, the most crucial portion of his intelligence, that remained independent. After boiler Number Three was activated, nearly a tenth of Enwang's soul region had evaporated in a few short seconds. Many of his memory materials had been wiped out in an instant, causing him to be slightly dazed. Only when Jing Xiao, who was affected, let out a blood-curdling scream did Enwang suddenly wake up. The kite string was about to break. How could the chain still be so sturdy? A self-mocking thought flashed through Enwang's mind. He forced himself to forget the imminent threat of death. He poured his own power into the chain in an attempt to control Number Three and break free from it. The heavily chained crow was the only channel to contact the two human-faced arachnids. It was also the main battlefield where the two human-faced arachnids clashed. If Enwang wanted to destroy the clash, breaking the chain was the most effective method. With Enwang's help, Number Three's power suddenly rose by a level. Her 8 limbs plucked at the void, moving with all her might in an attempt to go against the chain. The heavily chained crow became perfectly straight. The pulling force and the opposing force acted at the same time, causing the shaking of the chain to intensify. The vibrations of the chain connected into one, and finally turned into the sharp, wung-wung sound of a rubber band on the verge of collapse. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. The more intense the clash between the human-faced arachnids, the more terrifying the internal pressure of boiler Number Three became. The domain of Enwang's soul continued to be corroded, but he still needed to accelerate the process to ensure the output of Number Three's power. This was the stupidest kind of consumption, but in a rush, Enwang had no other choice. At this moment, Enwang felt that he and the heavily chained crow were like two burning sticks of gunpowder. It was a matter of who would burn to the end first, ignite the explosives and explode. The truth is above. Bus. The prayer and the trembling occurred at the same time. Another wave of collision exploded on the chains. The powerful impact finally broke through the limits of the heavily chained crow, causing it to suddenly lose its special structure and collapse with a hum. 03's body suddenly stopped as the chain was broken. However, Enwang was not happy at all. At this moment, the area of his soul had shrunk to 2/3 of its original size. A large amount of memory material had been annihilated. Even with his tenacious will, he appeared to be in a trance for a while. In addition, in the final clash of power, Enwang no longer had the strength to protect other areas. Zheng Zhao's kite string had also been severed. 03 floated in the hazy starry sky. Starlight filled the sky, but there was no longer any clear trail to guide it. It was as if it had lost its way in the starry sky and had lost its direction. Enwang caught his breath and sorted out the area of his soul that had become a mess. He also tried to use this opportunity to increase his control over 03. However, just as his soul area was gradually spreading towards the chaotic area of 03, the internal pressure of the boiler Number 3, after a short period of cooling, ignited with a rumble. Enwang forcefully endured the pain of being roasted by poisonous fire, ensuring that his heart was clear. However, his mind still sank heavily. 03 slowly turned its body. Its instincts were restless again, and it was even more intense than when it was in the fierce battle earlier. At this moment, Enwang heard a kind of fine low-pitched sound. It was like the background noise that existed in a big city at all times. It was faint and undetectable, yet everywhere. If one were to look closely, they would be able to see a lot of messy information. Amidst this faint noise that was hard to ignore, the shadow was like a muddy river that silently flowed past. A huge and ugly body floated out from within. Its limbs were spread out and its demonic eyes flickered. When it first appeared, it was at the side of 03. When its crooked and bent body completely floated above the shadowy water, it was already in front of 03. Through 03. And Wang locked onto his target from number 3's perspective. This human-faced arachnid was clearly a size larger than 03. Its body was more solid as well. The powerful pressure that assaulted its face made it hard for 03 to suppress its restlessness. 03's instincts should lean towards fleeing, but in the end, it chose to stay in this star field. This had nothing to do with courage. The reason for this was the incorporeal power of order. It had been placed into this hazy starry sky, turning it into a strange cage. Even though it was boundlessly vast, the two human-faced arachnids had already locked each other firmly. Only when victory and defeat were decided, when life and death were decided, would this be the final conclusion. It was that mysterious chain. It seemed to have collapsed, but in reality, it had turned from being tangible to incorporeal. It had used an even more inconceivable form to arrange order. It had displayed an inescapable coercive power. Just as Wang understood this clearly, the human-faced arachnids had already begun fighting again. The human-faced arachnids were not like intelligent life forms. They did not speak nonsense. Under the urge of their instincts, both sides activated their charging mode and collided with each other. Number 3's left chelicerae were bitten off by the powerful arachnid in just a single exchange. The powerful arachnid swallowed the chelicerae into its stomach. Number 3's sharp limbs on the same side stabbed into the side of the arachnid's humanoid body. The wound sizzled and burned. Bloody flames soared. The two human-faced arachnids let out soundless roars of pain at the same time. But this kind of direct wrestling mode did not change at all. It was as if they had returned to the ancient Colosseum. They used the most bloody form to please others. Then at this moment, who was the one they were trying to please? And Wang strove to maintain a clear line of thought during the confrontation between the human-faced arachnids. The changes in the chain displayed the exquisite switching of the power of order. This was absolutely not a spontaneous change. At the very least, there was a frame that encompassed this starry sky. Who did the frame belong to? And Wang knew the answer. But in the face of this hazy starry sky, even with his experience and ruthlessness, it was hard for him to come up with a suitable method to lock onto the person behind the scenes. Unless... Number 3's body trembled violently once more. It was at a complete disadvantage in this wrestling. Right now, half of its ugly face had been bitten off by the powerful arachnid. It had lost half of its 6-colored demonic eyes. Its aura was rapidly weakening. There was no chance of victory if this continued. And Wang only used 1/10 of a second to make a final judgment. The corresponding choice did not take up too much time. His mind reflected internally. A gloomy round bead appeared within the area of his soul. The bead was covered densely with strange and bizarre patterns. This was the secret curse of death that he had formed in order to kill Luo Nan as quickly as possible. Right now, Wang did not hesitate at all. His soul strength crushed over, shattering the secret curse. A fatal negative energy swept through the area of his soul. The pain of his mind was indescribable with words. But he could use a similar method to vent it. His mind surged and he roared loudly on the mental plane. Chapter 246. An invisible wave swept across the starry sky, spreading far and wide. At Wang's side, he still understood the true meaning of the fluctuations. Expanding another circle, only pure power was exposed, pushing outwards layer by layer. Under the effect of this power, the starlight that filled the sky was like candlelight in a gale, about to be extinguished. In fact, no stars could be destroyed. This hazy starry sky was nothing more than a projection of Luo Nan's perception. It was purely a picture of information. What Wang was doing now was using the probing waves to sort out the veins within, following the path of the projection and pouring the relevant information back into the material plane. The blessing of the projection of the scales of truth, the information of the deadly secret curse, and the instincts of the human-faced arachnid merged together. Its penetrative power was incomparable. Whether it was the logic world or the scene of Luo Nan's consciousness, none of them were able to isolate it. The probing waves pushed forward layer by layer, and they soon received results. In the material plane, in the metropolis, the flames of life flickered. There was no actual damage, but within the area of influence, there was information that resembled the ravings of hallucinations. It flowed into the tens of thousands of people. The vast majority of the information would be unconsciously filtered out by people. A small portion would form a relatively clear consciousness, but it would be ignored due to the lack of corresponding information. Only a limited few pieces of information would touch upon those with keen senses, who were familiar with Luo Nan, and form an instinctive reaction, forming feedback. Although it was limited, it was enough. Nanster, is someone calling you? Shui Lei turned his head in all directions but couldn't see anything. He was quite puzzled for a moment. Luo Nan went, "Oh," but he didn't respond. He continued to look up at the sky. It was unknown when the autumn rain that had fallen for the middle of the night had stopped. The power supply at Frost River Reality had yet to be restored, and the evacuation of the trapped citizens was nearing its end. The sounds of people gradually grew sparse, making the night seem as dark as ink and the shadows of the buildings dim. The clearing of the outer region was almost complete. The sniper point at Yulan Hotel had just been confirmed to be cleared. The members of the association all went to the street where the Yulan Hotel was located. This was currently the command center for the government and the military, and it was also the most well-informed place. The military ships slowly entered the airspace above, representing the military's full involvement in the incident. The warship was floating above the city. This was a rare sight and it attracted a large number of people to watch and point at it. Although Luo Nan's gaze was also looking up, it was directed at the area of Frost River Reality. The profoundness of the logic world was reflected in the pitch-black cluster of high-rise buildings, behind the void where the naked eye could not see. Shui Lei didn't receive a response, so he didn't think much of it. He imitated Luo Nan and raised his head to look at the conjoined building complex in the distance. But no matter how he sized it up, he was unable to see anything. He could only scratch his head. The way of the world right now is really evil. With his own strength he could casually create a space to use. It's no wonder why Hall Master Zhang said that if one isn't able to adapt to the changes in one's cultivation, one would be eliminated as soon as one awakens from it. Their gazes were also directed at the association members. The vast majority of the onlookers were still at a loss over the circumstances of the sudden disappearance of the large group of terrorists. Luo Nan and his group had already obtained a clearer answer. Papercut did his best to widen his eyes and mumbled, "So it turns out President Ouyang is watching. Logic World? The association didn't hear anything about it before. You've tricked them so badly. I'm just taking advantage of the situation." Red Fox was the only member of the association who made direct contact with Ouyang Qin tonight. He more or less had to bear the responsibility of explaining. He shot a glance at Luo Nan and sneered, "If you want to set rules for others, how can you do it without bringing out the momentum of a thunderbolt? The logic world is erected with full explosive power. I really want to see the faces of those orders." As he spoke, Red Fox's gaze stopped on Luo Nan's face. Even with Ouyang Chen's judgment of being ignorant and the repeated verification of reality, Red Fox could not help but want to test the young man's introverted and immature performance after true contact. "Do you see anything?" Luo Nan raised his head to look at the sky, not reacting at all. Shui Lei coughed to remind Red Fox, but he didn't receive a response. He could only reach out and poke Red Fox. It was as if Luo Nan had just woken up from a dream. He turned his head to scan his surroundings. He Yuan was the society's full representative right now. She was communicating with the government and the military. She was so busy that not even her shadow could be seen. Bamboo Pole had followed her as a technical member. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan had gone to the military security vehicle. It was unknown what they were up to. Cat Eyes said that she was very tired and went to find a place to daydream. Only Shui Lei remained by his side. Red Fox's gaze pointed at Luo Nan. It was hard to avoid awkwardness when Luo Nan and Red Fox met each other after such an intense conflict had occurred. Luo Nan had no experience in dispelling this. Shui Lei could not help either. Luo Nan could only blink. "What did you say?" Red Fox did not get angry. He just pointed in the direction of Frost River Reality. "You are proficient in mental senses. You can see things more clearly than us. What's going on over there? Can you tell me?" "You're not looking?" "No, I saw a bit earlier." Luo Nan was quite used to this sort of matter-of-fact attitude. He thought for a moment and said, "It's a precise structure that interferes with the mental plane and the material plane. It's like the shield of truth, but it's very different. It really isn't the same." Red Fox was a bit unable to continue facing Luo Nan's bewildering logic. He could only laugh dryly. Most of the manifestations of extraordinary powers are like this. He gave Luo Nan face this time. He did not let Luo Nan blurt out the word, "nonsense." Luo Nan was speechless for a time. He was not stumped by Red Fox's question. It was just that the results of clairvoyance were far too complicated to describe with words. Plus, the results of his clairvoyance were a sort of correction to his previous understanding. From Luo Nan's previous understanding, the mental plane was a sort of deep multi-layered structure. It was like countless curtains stacked together. The layers were distinct. The closer one was to the material plane, the thicker the curtains were. And the lowest part was connected to the material plane. They interfered with each other. The degree of interference depended on the magnitude of the applied force. Therefore, interference between the mental and material planes occurred on everyone. It was just that the interference of ordinary people was negligible. It could be ignored. The interference of ability users was much more obvious. The Shield of Truth was the most powerful and clearest interference method that Luo Nan had ever seen. It was what he believed to be the benchmark of interference between the mental and material planes. As for Rui Wen, her soul and fleshly body were as one. It was a different situation. It was incomparable. However, the interference of the logic world shattered Luo Nan's understanding that he had just formed not too long ago. Under the senses of his clairvoyance, the multi-layered curtains of the mental plane rolled down together. They no longer possessed the sense of layers. Instead, they overlapped and warped, even tearing apart. Some of them were originally quite a distance away from the material plane, but they forcefully converged together. Because of this, the lower layers of curtains even had an interference effect, twisting into a ball. This was the third state of the relationship between the mental and material planes that Luo Nan had seen. It was also the most complicated one. Chapter 247. Through a complicated method of interference between the spiritual and material planes, Ouyang Chen achieved the peeling off of the material plane surface layer. Virtual and real interacted with each other, constructing a spatial fault that resembled the real world. The rules and regulations inside were no easier than building a skyscraper. Delving into the details would only exhaust one's mind, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Luo Nan was just looking at the general situation. He didn't continue to get tangled up. Far too much information was involved in explaining these things to Red Fox. A good portion of it was Luo Nan's personal comprehension. Right now, he lacked confidence in his ability to express himself with words. It was difficult for him to speak for a time. Just as he was pondering how to respond, the sound of a car came from behind him. Luo Nan was just about to turn his head to check when his neck tightened. Someone had already grabbed him by the back of his collar and forcefully dragged him over. His back smashed against the lower edge of the car. "Stop talking nonsense and get in the car." Zhang Yingying popped her head out of the carriage and urged impatiently. The vehicle she had transferred over should be a military security vehicle. It was rather large and the rear compartment was enclosed. It would not be a problem for it to carry dozens of people. What's so urgent? Luo Nan thought that there was another mission, so he didn't bicker with Zhang Yingying. He nodded toward Red Fox and boarded the carriage first. Behind him, Shuelei, the Red Fox, and the others also came up one after another. However, very soon, everyone was a little confused. The situation inside was a little different from what they had imagined. The space was relatively narrow, and it was densely packed with all kinds of equipment. It seemed a little crowded after a few people came in. Go to the hospital. Bai Xinyan had just taken off her trench coat and changed into a white doctor's coat. She even put on sterile gloves. She looked like she was about to go all out. Luo Nan was stupefied for a moment. Zhang Yingying, who was next to him, simply took off his clothes. She pulled off his outer cover and lifted his underwear. Wow. Shuelei sighed. There were so many people in the car. Luo Nan's face heated up. Hey! Zhang Yingying didn't care about this at all. Her fingers dug into Luo Nan's undergarments, and she even impudently stroked the lines of muscles on his back and waist. You might be an F-rank disabled candidate, but you actually aren't particularly skinny and weak. Her soft and smooth fingertips streaked across. The sensation was warm, but it caused Luo Nan to quiver and shiver. He even forgot to speak the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Judging from his body fat percentage, his physique isn't any worse than his peers. However, compared to soul energy, it's nothing. Don't move. Bai Xinyan shouted at Luo Nan to stop the writhing and struggling Luo Nan. She connected the wires of the apparatus to various parts of Luo Nan's body. In this way, Luonan was embarrassed to move even if he wanted to. He could only obediently allow Zhang Yingying to completely remove his clothes. He asked helplessly, "What exactly do you want?" Acting cool is fun for a moment, but in the blink of an eye, it's the crematorium. "I'm here to bring down your fever." Zhang Yingying temporarily took on the role of nurse. She felt that it was very interesting. She used her finger to poke at Luonan's body. She played quite happily. Bai Xinyan saw that Luonan's body temperature was rising. She didn't allow Zhang Yingying to tease him any further. She began to adjust the apparatus and explained, "No one knows when the effects of the Shield of Truth will disappear. And right now, the amplification of your soul strength is quite dangerous. One mistake and the two sides will collide. You won't even have the chance to save yourself. So, you need to be under observation for 24 hours. No matter how good the equipment here is, it's still better to be at the hospital." Luonan laughed bitterly. "It can't be that serious, right? Just prepare for the worst." Bai Xinyan's tone was light, but in her heart, she was already certain that the trouble that awaited them would not be small. This could be seen from the fate of the first two generations of the Luo family. Moreover, the problem of the imbalance of body and soul was not the only problem. Red Fox's brows furrowed before Papercut's voice fell. He subconsciously extended his hand and pressed his ear. His gaze flickered toward Luonan. Shuelei, who was at the side, saw his actions and exclaimed, "Did you hear it too?" Red Fox indicated for him to be quiet, then he made a few gestures toward Papercut. After the logic world was established, the psychic wave network entered a state of paralysis. It had yet to recover, and the secret communication between them was far less convenient than before. Fortunately, Papercut could understand. He quickly nodded, closed his eyes and sensed for a moment. Then his expression turned grave. "The spirit summoning technique?" "Yeah, the spirit summoning technique." Bai Xinyan sighed, which was rare for her. "I don't know what trouble your boss Luo has stirred up. And Wang is clearly trapped in the logic world. His situation is terrible, but Wang still tries to use this method to lock onto Wang's position regardless of the cost. Plus he's almost succeeded." The gazes of everyone in the car turned toward Luonan. Luonan had nothing to say. He could only wear the apparatus and wires on his body. He acted like a puppet, allowing others to do as they pleased. The door to the car opened again at this time. Cat Eyes, who had gone into a daze just now, boarded the car. Bai Xinyan said, "Sister Nun and Bamboo Pole will move together with the military. Now that everyone on our side is here, there's no need to delay. No matter who we're facing, it's always best to distance ourselves." The car suddenly increased in speed as they spoke. Soon they left the conjoined building complex behind. The group of people was basically retreating from the battlefield. 2 minutes passed and the group exchanged glances. The range of the spirit summoning technique should be out of range by now. The group of people let out sighs of relief. They no longer needed to pay attention to the intermittent shouts in their ears. Right now, the straight-line distance between the security car and Frost River reality was over 10 kilometers. Even the secret-bound First Ablatum would find it hard to reach, let alone Wang, who was separated by a layer of the logic world. However, Luonan was not particularly optimistic. He did not have any hopes that Wang would be able to remove the pressure from Wang just by moving the car. For the current Wang and even for Luonan, distance was not something that held much significance. The intertwining of the many layers of curtains of the logic world caused distortions to appear in the distance on the mental plane. In a situation where the distance on the material plane remained the same, a misalignment appeared between 2 points on the mental plane. It was like the overused example of spatial folding. Space was like a piece of paper. The two ends were far apart, but when the paper was folded, the originally long distance would become within reach. Luonan did not merely observe this special structural pattern. In fact, Luonan immediately discovered a flaw and opportunity after Wang ordered the human-faced arachnid to swallow the high imitation within Qingli's body. Through the heavily chained crow, Luonan used the Wraith sign, which was located far away in a secret location of the Blood Flame Order, to establish a connection with the Order of Justice's human-faced arachnid. Luonan used the characteristics of the logic world to take advantage of the situation to construct a colosseum, or perhaps an altar. Luonan used the format pyramid as a foundation to erect the framework of the altar. This was something Luonan was already familiar with. It did not take any effort at all. The only difference this time was the span. What Luonan could use Wang could use as well. The existence of the logic world had severely distorted the mental plane, but it could not stop Wang's evil thoughts. When the evil thoughts attacked, strangely enough, the projection of the scales of truth floated in Luonan's mind, especially the pair of black and white plates floating up and down. A familiar whisper seeped into Luonan's mind. As long as one yearns for the truth, there will certainly be two sides of the scales. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Chapter 248. Luonan's senses were extremely subtle. In the past, when he erected the framework of the altar, he could always transcend the world and not be directly affected by the sacrificer, only receiving the relevant benefits, as long as he could bear it. But now, Wang's evil thoughts had attacked and the projection of the scales of truth had inexplicably entered. That feeling of being high and mighty had been offended. The frame of the sacrificial altar he had propped up had also been eroded and collided with by external forces. This had never happened before. In the order of justice, the scales of truth were a supreme holy relic. It was equivalent to a sacrificial tool and could be considered a framework for the altar. And Wang had already been placed on the scales of truth, which meant that he was the sacrificial object of the scales of truth. One object could be used for two purposes. Their goals were different and their natures were different. Conflict was inevitable. And what Wang was doing right now wasn't just letting the two frames collide together. And Wang's malicious intent had locked onto his target. He clearly wanted to pull Luonan into the depths of the maelstrom. It seemed like he had succeeded. Luonan tried to expel the projection of the scales of truth from his mind, but it was useless. This toy grew clearer and clearer, especially on the side of the white plate. It seemed to possess a soul-stealing power that pulled at his mind. It was unavoidable. Upon closer inspection, it seemed to be related to the structural model of the shield of truth. As a result, his body was somewhat tightened, as if he had been tied up by invisible strings. Luonan struggled a bit uncomfortably, but he never thought that the equipment outside his body would immediately sound an alarm. The gazes of everyone in the car suddenly converged on him. Zhang Yingying, the temporary nurse, immediately raised her hand high. "I didn't do anything. Even if you want to do it, you can't." Bai Xinyan was using the AR image to integrate the data from the instrument. All kinds of graphics and data were arranged in different levels. Those who were not experts would feel their eyelids twitch. However, at this time, everyone could see that in the left region, on a nearly flat wavy line, there was a series of subtle fluctuations. The strength of my body has changed, although the change is very small. Bai Xinyan's gaze turned and swept past Luonan's face. "The shield of truth hasn't cracked, right?" "I'm not too sure about that." Luonan reached out to scratch his cheeks. He was a bit embarrassed. Although this matter was confidential and couldn't be discussed in detail, he didn't pretend to be a hero. Instead, he showed an uncertain attitude. Bai Xinyan raised his eyebrows slightly, but before he could say anything, Zhang Yingying had already slapped his shoulder again. "You don't know? What do you mean by unclear?" "It's not my problem. In fact, it was." Having fallen to this point, Luonan had to admit that he had gone too far. Right now, Luonan could already sense the existence of a powerful source of heat beside him. That familiar sense of order was undoubtedly Fairchild's. Luonan combined the situation within the logic world with the memory fragments of Enqingli that were gathered from the high imitation. Luonan made a judgment that made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Perhaps, like Child, he had been killed first by Wang and sent to the scales of truth to be used as a counterweight. Would he also be placed on the altar and become a sacrifice one day? How ironic. The transcendental feeling of constructing the framework of the altar had caused Luonan to lose his accurate judgment. Even if Wang had swallowed the bait himself and bumped into him, the Wraith Sign's level still had the advantage. His eagerness to hunt attitude was too frivolous. After the predicament of near collapse, Wang immediately used a ruthless and decisive response to give Luonan a good lesson. If Luonan's guess was correct, Wang should have seized the moment when Fairchild blessed him with the shield of truth. He used the secret technique of the order, which Luonan did not understand, to succeed in one fell swoop. And things would not end here. Right now, Luonan seemed to have replaced characters like Fairchild and Ouyang Chen. He had become Wang's #1 target. Even Luonan himself was intoxicated by Wang's ability to draw hatred. Naturally, the most urgent task was to get the situation back on track. Whether it was President Ouyang or Fairchild, had those two been idle for too long? Maybe Wang was exerting his strength against Fairchild, and he ended up bringing disaster to the fish in the moat? Everyone could see that Fairchild had blessed Luonan. Papercut furrowed his brows and guessed. He was immediately on the right path. Red Fox spoke in a deep voice, or it could be a direct target. It's like hitting a cow across a mountain. Zhang Yingying reached out to point at Red Fox. She was in great agreement. That's right. Then let's take defensive measures first. Right now there are no conditions. Bai Xinyan shook her head. She raised her wristband to make contact with the outside world. Soon she connected. Sister, your boss has the ability to stir up trouble. Even a layer of the world can't stop him. I suggest that you urge President Ouyang to end this battle quickly. Luo Nan's head hung down. He really did not have the face to see anyone for a time. However, he would not be distracted by the mundane plane for too long. He could not completely rely on others to help him. His mind quickly focused back on the altar frame. He could not relax for even a moment on Anwang's side, even if Anwang was weakening at a visible speed. There's not much time left. Anwang was very clear about his own state. In the beast fighting arena, half of Number 3's limbs had been devoured by the bite. Number 3's expression was dispirited, and she had no strength to fight back. Anwang's soul region trembled and shrank. Only half of its peak remained. The rest was torn apart and diverted by the two vortexes. The beast fighting arena was secondary. The projection of the scales of truth was the main target. Since Luo Nan was placed on the scales of truth, he could only be on the side of truth. Anwang had to keep up with the scales of truth, but Luo Nan's weight was absolutely extraordinary. He and Fairchild merged together, causing the projection of the scales of truth to slide into an unbalanced state in an instant. Anwang's mind grew colder and calmer the more dangerous it was in this moment of crisis. It was like the projection of the scales of truth. It was clearly illusory, but it possessed the dignity of a holy object. It possessed the root of immortality. For a short period of time, Anwang could withstand this method of burning his soul. He could even obtain an even stronger tension and achieve an even better result. Bang! It was as if a bowstring had been plucked with force. A probing wave swept across the deep space in the instant the sound rang out. It was more tyrannical and penetrating than any previous wave. In this instant, the logic world and the hazy starry sky were practically transparent to Anwang. His consciousness spread to every nook and cranny of the void, to every level. Accompanying the transparency was a layer of fog that floated up. This was the phenomenon formed when the probing wave touched the material plane and interfered with each other. Too much of this mist had probably accumulated. Soon the night sky of the logic world became a bit turbid. Bang! Another rumbling sound rang out, and the visibility of the logic world dropped by another chunk. It was as if a great fog had descended. The three skyscrapers seemed to be warping in the curtain of night. Ouyang, Fairchild and the projection of the scales of truth still had some telepathic connection. He could also indirectly touch upon Anwang's state. An ominous omen arose for a time and he warned Ouyang Qin. Before Ouyang Qin could respond, a bolt of lightning and fire suddenly leaped out from the upper layers of the hazy mist. The glaring forked trajectory was like a heavenly tree that had been cut down. It smashed down. Why was it smashed? Chapter 249. The moment the giant arm smashed down, the seemingly real night sky of the logic world seemed to collapse. Space warped and shook, transforming into fine waves that could be clearly felt. The waves spread across everyone's skin, causing a majority of them to shiver. A corresponding chill emerged from the bottom of their hearts when the projection of the scales of truth at the center of the three buildings suddenly distorted. Its light dimmed and the shadow of the giant arm swallowed it. The illusory projection was clearly unable to obstruct it. The shadow of the giant arm wrapped in lightning rushed down and struck the ceiling of Frost River reality. Even now there was no visible pause. There was not even a particularly strong impact. It was simply like a corrosive acid that penetrated from the ceiling to the bottom. In the blink of an eye, a penetrating wound over 30 meters in diameter was torn open. Then ripples of vibration spread from the crack in all directions. Frost River reality completely collapsed and collapsed. It was only at this moment that a terrifying sonic boom rang out. The glass walls of the three skyscrapers, regardless of whether they were facing Frost River reality or not, were blasted to pieces. The lightning and fire surrounding the giant arm flowed and sputtered. The exploding beams of lightning were like countless living snakes. They leaped into the three surrounding Great Xia buildings and wantonly flew about. Baze, who had just been knocked to the ground floor by Fairchild, just happened to climb to the bottom of Frost River reality. He watched as Frost River reality collapsed and the lightning and fire closed in. Without a word, he crashed into the inner layers of the building. He rolled and dodged, but in the end he was not stuck. Baze's reaction was fast and his luck was pretty good. However, others might not be like him. There was an Ablatum knight who was in the direction of Frost River reality. Misfortune befell him. The chaotic lightning and fire just so happened to surround him. He could not avoid it. When the lightning touched his body, he wanted to use his painstakingly cultivated extraordinary strength to resist. However, in an instant, his sturdy torso was affected by an unimaginable force. His limbs were greatly distorted. It was as if a pair of demonic hands were kneading him like a meatball. He was kneaded into a badly mangled ball of flesh and blood as he tumbled about in the destroyed building. The most terrifying thing was that this person did not die quickly. Muffled screams burst forth from the ball of flesh. They were bitter and desperate. Even a powerhouse like Baze's face turned black when he saw this scene. He did not look back as he crashed into the depths of the building. He wanted to get as far away from the lightning as possible. That's not lightning, at least not the pure kind. Luonan could roughly see that the source of this wave of electricity was the same as the mist created by Wang's probing waves. It originated from the intense interference between the mental and material planes. There was no pattern to this kind of interference. It was chaotic and violent. Coupled with the powerful ionization effect of lightning, this was the final result. But then again, this scattering of electric light covered a diameter of nearly a kilometer. How powerful was the corresponding soul power that acted on the physical plane? Using himself as a standard, he was stronger than 10,000 times? Or 100 million times? That wasn't realistic. Even the unfathomable and unfathomable President Ouyang Chen gave Luonan the feeling that he was far from this level. There should be some special way of using him. Luonan's attention was unavoidably drawn to it. However, that area was destined to not be a good target for observation. The terrifying power in the shadow was not only destructive to the material plane, but also to the mental plane. If it was just a little bit late, it would be like the magma of a volcano eruption, pouring down on Yang Ling's head and face. Luonan's pure observation mode was effective. He did not receive a direct attack. But the human-faced arachnid that was fighting to death in the Astral Colosseum was not so lucky. It let out a miserable hiss at the same time, and its body actually burst into flames at the same time. According to the information transmitted by the Wraith sign, the scorching attack of the giant shadow arm and the chaotic core of the human-faced arachnid were simply like the relationship between a torch and boiling oil. There was still a distance before the human-faced arachnid was ignited. As for the other human-faced arachnid, number 3, she had already been burned through. A portion of her remains had been burned into a steaming mist of energy, which was absorbed and consumed by the endlessly expanding shadow. The Wraith sign, who was entangled above the altar, had a sense of number 3's state. The instantaneous change refreshed the information of its senses, making it even clearer. Behind this terrifying shadow, there was something more real. Perhaps, it was a powerful and hungry demon. This thing had yet to truly enter the logic world, but its powerful strength had already displayed its vicious and ruthless characteristics clearly before everyone's eyes. The curtain on the mental plane was swaying and fluctuating, twisting and twisting. This made it even more difficult for Luonan to clearly distinguish the true level and position of the demon. He could only make a scenario guess. This demon was like a gluttonous old cat. It stood on the shore, extending its claws to stir the water, hoping to catch delicious fish and eat its fill. Who was it that attracted this old cat? It was undoubtedly the unfathomable Wang, who was currently burning within number 3. Oh, judging from the Wraith sign's senses, that person's mood seemed to be quite good. It was just as Luonan knew. Right now, Wang's soul was ceaselessly withering within the flames ignited by number 3. However, Wang was in a cheerful mood. He wantonly released his emotions under the encirclement of the flames. If his fleshly body was still present, it would be the same as laughing aloud. He should be laughing. Wang was over 60 years old, and he had waited until the era where the heavens and earth were changed. He had been a member of the Order of Justice for 40 years, and he was a firm believer. Unfortunately, he was encumbered by age in his body. No matter how clear his ideals were, the slightest difference was 1,000 miles. He was always blocked from a higher plane and he no longer had the chance to struggle. But now, as the logic world trembled under the enormous shadow fist of the demon, a crack finally appeared in the incorporeal barrier that had always blocked his head. Looking ahead, perhaps his chances were still slim, but there was still a chance and it wasn't too far away. The shadow swallowed up a portion of the starry sky. Luonan's perception was unable to form an effective analysis of it. For Nwang this was the best road sign. He no longer needed to distinguish the direction. He drove number 3, which was almost completely burned out, away from the battlefield, and he leaped into the shadow. The wraith sign did not pursue Nwang under the threat of being completely ignited at any moment. Plus, the altar's frame had turned into a pot of porridge from all sorts of disturbances. It was impossible to stop Nwang. As for the demon behind the shadow, it happily accepted the food that directly entered its mouth. But this was not enough. The demon's appetite was clearly extremely good. It didn't discover any fatal threat after its attack in the air, so the congealed shadow began to spread. It entered into casting net mode and its target was pointed at others. Everyone in the logic world had become its target. It was guided by chaotic desires. It would chase after whatever was the most delicious. If everything was delicious, then it would want them all. Before the mist of the probing wave that interfered with the material plane could dissipate, the shadow of darkness flooded in, turning it into surging black clouds that pressed down on the logic world. Chapter 250. Child's body glowed with a mercury-like radiance. It collided with the dark clouds and turbid mist that surged toward him. The two forces collided. Nothing had happened at first, but at this moment, the giant shadow arms smashed Frost River reality with unexhausted momentum. It slammed into the ground. At that moment, the shockwave swept across, and the 300-story buildings could be seen shaking at a visible degree. The transverse and longitudinal waves were tangent. The change in strength became even more intense. The rooftop of the building beneath Child's feet was like a torn rag. Long scars spread rapidly and branched out in all directions. It looked like it was about to fall apart. Child experienced the difference in strength. He knew he was no match, but he was expressionless. He only cast his gaze at Ouyang Chen. "You've been watching for so long just for this? But it's not enough." Ouyang Chen looked up. The source of the danger hidden behind the scenes had finally revealed itself. Right now, the giant shadow arm had formed a pitch-black pillar that pierced through the heavens and the earth. It was like a rail elevator that led to outer space. Its end was on the ground, but it was still difficult to determine where the front end was. Dark clouds and turbid mist swirled around the pillar, forming a twisted vortex. There were also layers of cloud chi that surged and surged. Lightning flashed within the vortex, revealing a terrifying might. The following changes in the situation could no longer be resolved by watching. Ouyang Chen began to exert his strength. There was nothing special about him. Only the materialized ripples swept out from his body. They were invincible. The dark clouds and turbid mist around the giant shadow pillar split apart. The impact of the ripples made contact with the shadow itself, causing it to tremble endlessly. The demon behind the shadow seemed to feel threatened. Suddenly, a cluster of lightning and fire leaped out of the dark clouds and turbid mist and exploded on top of Ouyang Chen's head. Ouyang Chen did not dodge. He simply opened his mouth and inhaled, swallowing the lightning into his stomach. His expression did not change. Light crackled and pulsed around his body, but it was smoothed out by the ripples. Ouyang Chen dealt with it rather easily after exchanging blows. But then he frowned. "It's filled with the scent of greed and restlessness." Child asked, "Is it an extraordinary?" "It does not possess extraordinary thought. It is pure chaos and chaos. It's more like a human-faced arachnid." Ouyang Chen's line of sight swept past the giant shadow pillar and the swirling clouds. He sighed. However, it turns out that there is also the existence of a domain in the midst of extreme chaos. From this point of view, it wouldn't be wrong to say that it's an extraordinary. The so-called giant shadow pillar was an area where the spiritual and material planes interfered with each other. The dark clouds and turbid fog at the periphery were the same, but the degree of interference was much lower. As for the periphery, it was of the same level. Given that demon's abilities, it was entirely possible for him to cover the entire logic world with his power. However, its outstanding instincts allowed it to divide itself into different levels. It used the most powerful interference to distort a portion of the physical space, and then used this as a weapon to create an intense conflict with the outside world. It was like a lever, using a small amount of energy to pry out power that far exceeded the limit. The dark clouds and turbid fog, the leaping lightning and fire, all of it came like this. This kind of high-level technique was the effect of an extraordinary's domain. Ouyang Chen did not dwell too much on this point. Chaotic enemies, even if they possessed the abilities of extraordinaries, were not worth paying too much attention to. Yes, itself had no logic to speak of. Even if they could analyze something, it would only be superficial and could only be used to fool amateurs. Even if he wanted to study it, he had to find the overall mechanism that formed this chaotic power. His target was Wang, and he had no intention of changing it at the last minute. Ouyang Chen's figure rose slightly, the tips of his feet a few inches off the ground. Without any support, he floated in the air. At the level of extraordinaries, even if they did not have the innate ability to fly, they could still create an environment for flight through the mutual interference between the spiritual and material planes. This was also one of the uses of a domain. Wherever Ouyang Chen went, whether it was the clouds or the lightning, they were all eliminated by the substantial ripples. It looked like he was unimpeded. And at the front of the spreading ripples, it gradually became clear like a ray of light. The giant shadow pillar, which had originally been a single entity, was now faintly transparent. The front of the ripples, which had always been very orderly, also began to distort. The demon and Ouyang Chen's domain had collided. The air in the logic world suddenly tightened and the entire area shook. The rooftop of Building A, which had been on the verge of collapse from the confrontation between Child and the dark clouds and turbid fog, had now collapsed. The priests and knights who were at a loss, all fell down miserably. Child did not have the ability to float in the air, so his figure could not avoid falling down. He fell down from the gray turbid fog and smoke. He exhaled and a mercury-like radiance forcefully cleared the surrounding area. He raised his head to look up. However, he was not looking at Ouyang Chen, nor was he looking at the demon that had yet to reveal itself. What he saw was clearly a human-faced arachnid struggling endlessly in the shadows. The collision of the domain caused the Darksider lifeform, which had been submerged within the giant shadow pillar, to reveal itself. Number 3. This human-faced arachnid had just escaped into the depths of the mental plane. When it probed the deep sea, it was still strange and inexplicable. It was hard to track it down. But now that it had reappeared, its demonic body was incomplete, and its demeanor was dispirited and listless. Its entire body was ignited with flames. Most importantly, it had lost its special ability to wander in the depths of the mental plane. Was it because of the impact of the giant shadow pillar, or was it because of some other reason? Child could see that although number 3 was struggling in the shadows, it did not look like it was trying to escape. Instead, it was continuing to break into the inner layer. He could not help but suspect that the one inside was still in Wang. Doing something like this in the depths of the shadow dark domain ruled by the demons was simply suicide. Ouyang Chen, who was in the air, could see things a bit more clearly than Child. The Wang he knew was not a simple and crude character. Even if Wang acted on impulse, there would certainly be a basic reason. The conflict between the domains grew even more intense. Ouyang Chen used this opportunity to see through the layers of shadows. He could faintly see a glimmer of light shining within the giant shadow pillar. He had found the reason. Ouyang Chen quickly determined that the so-called glimmer was the projection of the scales of truth. It had not collapsed from the initial impact. Instead, it had embedded itself into the depths of the shadows. Moreover, its form was the same as before. Of course, there were still some changes. The kite that controlled the chaos element on the black plate was currently curled up into a ball. It was on the verge of death. The mist formed by the chaos element had completely melted into the surrounding shadows. It looked like the kite would be its turn at any moment. Under Ouyang Chen's attentive gaze, the human-faced arachnid number 3 was doing its utmost to shorten the distance between it and the projection of the scales of truth and the kite. The arachnid did not cower in the slightest, even though there was a terrifying high temperature and corrosiveness within the shadows that were constantly digesting it. Chapter 251. The kite entered its abdomen and number 3 suddenly stiffened. The raging flames burning around its body seemed to grow fiercer. Amidst the flames, the remnants of the demonic body were burned to nothingness in an instant. The remaining parts carried the momentum of the impact and collided with the black plate. The flames exploded before it could even get close. The entire human-faced arachnid was turned into flying ash. The bits and pieces of ash fell onto the plate. Flying ash and smoke? Ouyang Chen and Child did not think so. It was just as they expected. As the flying ash fell onto the plate, the turbid mist of chaos element, which had been exhausted and dissipated, began to bubble up. It churned and rolled, quickly forming a scale. Suddenly, a long leg pierced out from within this turbid mist. With a few fiddles, the human-faced arachnid's ugly body propped itself up from within. Its eyes were bewildered with 6 colors and its 8 legs were divided. The flames on its body dissipated and it returned to its peak state. The only difference was that its body was much smaller. It was originally on the same level as the projection of the scales of truth. Now it had shrunk by several times. It was about the same size as the kite it had just swallowed. Replacing the kite, reducing the link and reintegrating the chaos element. Unexpected but reasonable. This is indeed in Wang's style. Ouyang Qin sighed. The chaos element, which had been utterly defeated, was clearly more efficient under the control of the human-faced arachnid. It was even able to absorb nutrients from the dark shadow domain, allowing it to continue to develop and grow stronger. This process of swallowing and replacing seemed logical, but it had to be known that the image of the kite had a rich inner meaning. It represented an extremely mature system of the order of justice and was the best choice for controlling the element of chaos. The human-faced arachnid's level of power might be above in Wang's, but connecting it with the existing system of the order of justice was always a problem. Only an old powerhouse like in Wang could debug a feasible plan to replace the kite in the shortest amount of time possible and successfully implement it. The most exquisite link was not the rebirth of the human-faced arachnid, but the union with the projection of the scales of truth. The miniature figure was no longer number 3's original body. It was its reflection in the scales of truth system. The real number 3 had already merged with the projection of the scales of truth. It was difficult to distinguish the real number 3 from the real scales of truth. But that was a problem on a different level. Ouyang Qin did not stop his advance. As he continued to approach the giant shadow pillar, he analyzed and illuminated the relevant areas, allowing the others to see the situation inside. There were not many people who still had the leisure to pay attention to this side, and Zheng Xiao was probably one of them. This first priest had always been calm. However, in the face of the continuous and drastic changes in the situation, his brain was often shut down. It was only when 03 devoured the kite that he truly woke up. Zheng Xiao clutched his chest. The kite had just been swallowed, and the related qi activity had been transferred and reconnected. It had almost paralyzed his heart, and now it was beating wildly in compensation. He was already considered lucky. The priests and knights around him had all fallen to the ground. No matter how the building beneath them shook, they could not feel anything. He did not know how many of them would wake up. He raised his head in a daze and looked into the depths of the shadow. Under the dual illumination of Ouyang Qin and the projection of the scales of truth, the shadow there was peeling off layer by layer. A portion of it was directly evaporated, while another portion was dissolved into the turbid fog of chaotic elements. It was certain that the projection of the scales of truth was using the dark shadow domain to rapidly increase the amount of chaotic elements on the secular side. This action was fruitful. One could see it from the current situation of the scales. The projection of the scales of truth shifted once more into an unbalanced state. But this time the black plate was the one that continued to sink. This indicated that the weight of the two sides had begun to invert. Zheng Xiao vaguely remembered that the appearance of this phenomenon was actually a preset condition when Wang spread out the evolution field. Wang had once told him that there might be a demon mentioned in the Holy Scripture that would take their place and contend against the nearly undefeatable Fairchild. Now the demon had truly come. Moreover, the demon's strength might far surpass that of the ears of truth. Beneath the thick layer of clouds is an island covered in boiling magma. The demon carries chains on its back as it travels through the clouds. Was this in Wang's verification? Right now he could not see the island or the chains, but there were layers of clouds and demons. Half of the Holy Scripture's account had been verified. In that case he could say with a bit of caution that the gate of truth really did exist. Was it really in Xia City? Zheng Zhao's face twitched slightly. If tonight was just a verification, then their mission would have been perfectly completed. They could retreat with success. But the current in Wang was probably thinking differently. The body transforms into a sacrificial vessel, stealing the sky and swapping the sun. According to the ritual of the church and Wang you're thinking of? Zheng Xiao had just sorted out an idea. The white plate that was constantly rising upward was constructed by the evolution field. After the projection of the scales of truth, an image appeared for the first time. The weaker side no longer had the qualifications to remain anonymous. The first thing that appeared was the structure of a kite shield. A mercury-like glow flowed on its surface. This was the reflection of the shield of truth. It undoubtedly represented Fairchild. Zheng Xiao cast his gaze toward Building A, but he could not see anything due to the dark clouds and turbid mist. He did not know what kind of mood Fairchild was in right now. But then an unexpected change occurred. The projection of the kite shield had just appeared when another light and shadow appeared. This one was much more concise. It was the composition of a tetrahedron with an inscribed sphere and an outerscribed sphere. Zheng Xiao had seen it not too long ago. The format pyramid. Zheng Xiao's brain nearly crashed once more. That Luo Nan. When did he go up? The scales of truth could not just go up on a whim. The operating steps inside were very complex. They required an extremely tight foundation and connection of energy. Only in one could carry out such operations. Considering the time conditions, this meant that when number 3 flew through the air and encountered dangerous situations, she had been dealing with Luo Nan? No matter how much weight Luo Nan occupied, the side of the white plate that carried him and Fairchild clearly could not compare to the other side, which was filled with chaotic and disorderly elements. Right now, the weights in Wang's hands were not too few. They were too many. He could easily deploy them. As long as he could bear the pressure of the demon behind the shadows, as long as he could endlessly obtain weights from the shadows, it would be very difficult to break this advantage. For this reason, Wang added the final stroke to his own plan. On top of the black plate, the human-faced arachnid suddenly opened its mouth and inhaled. It swallowed a portion of the turbid mist surrounding it into its stomach. It was unknown how the human-faced arachnid operated, but the constantly tilting scales actually began to return to normal. As it swayed, the black and white plates rose and fell. The human-faced arachnid also swallowed clouds of mist. Clearly, it was switching weights and searching for a point of balance. With enough weights, this was far too easy. The black and white plates appeared on a horizontal line once more, fulfilling the requirements of the order's holy object. It was like a fully matured seed that was buried in the void. Chapter 252. What happened? Luo Nan's mental senses chased after Wang, observing the logic world with his clairvoyance. He understood some of the changes in the situation, but he only understood half of them. By the time the giant cocoon of light appeared, he vaguely knew that he had reached the most crucial stage. However, he was limited by his level of understanding. His thoughts were stuck here and it was hard for him to continue. He could only continuously increase the precision of his senses and observe seriously. Even though this consumed 10 to 100 times more mental energy than the life sketches he had just comprehended, he felt that it was necessary. At this time, an indescribable light shone out from the projection of the scales of truth. One could not see anything by just sensing it, but under this light, the black and white plates of the scales of truth instantly lost their color. Black was no longer black and white was no longer white. It was as if some crucial element had been extracted. It was as if they had been dyed together, indistinguishable. It was this indescribable light that soundlessly opened up a region within the shadow pillar. Its appearance was similar to the cocoon of light that the first 3 ablatums constructed the evolution field. It was just that it was 10 times larger. The projection of the scales of truth resided in the center of the cocoon of light. Light and shadow interweaved, forming countless lines of varying thickness. At first glance, they looked like branches that were spreading out. They grew endlessly and some even wrapped around the 2 plates. The young branches spiraled and pierced into the projection above. It didn't matter if it was the human-faced arachnid, the kite shield, or the format pyramid. Because of this, the 3 projection diagrams underwent changes at the same time. Light and shadow warped slightly and their structures melted. Holy space, extraordinary substitution. Ouyang Chen's body was covered in layers of ripples, offsetting the resistance of the shadow pillar. He approached the cocoon of light step by step. The front of the ripples had already made contact with the cocoon of light, undulating and rippling. Although his progress was not slow, he still frowned when he saw the cocoon of light form and the ripples transform. You've gone from a small substitution of worldly objects to a large substitution of the extraordinary domain. And Wang, your moves are truly extraordinary. However, has your first ablatum allowed you to borrow the power of the scales of truth? There was no response from within the cocoon of light, but Luo Nan's heart inexplicably palpitated. Substitution? He understood a bit. At this moment, the 2 ends of the scales, the human-faced arachnid, him and Fairchild, were they exchanging places? No, it wasn't. After all, the 2 altar frameworks were still entangled. And Wang had placed Luo Nan on the scales of truth, so the 2 frameworks were destined to form a close connection. Luo Nan could roughly sense that the 2 ends of the scale had merely blurred the boundary between chaos and order. There was no relationship of substitution between the 2. It was more like a sort of blending. Together, they formed a sort of indescribable existence, and they used this as a foundation to grow and strengthen without end. As for the replacement, it happened on an even more mysterious level, and he had no idea what it was at the moment. But the human-faced arachnid, Fairchild, and Luonan were all unavoidably affected by the exchange. They were all greatly affected. The rooftop of Building A had already collapsed. Amid the dust and debris, Fairchild raised his hands and stared at it. He watched as the flowing mercury light dimmed layer by layer, his face expressionless. Luonan swept his eyes over this scene. He was slightly startled, and his heart suddenly throbbed. Not good. Even Child was in trouble, let alone him? Something was definitely going to happen on the main body's side. The melting of the format pyramid structure on the scales of truth was an ominous sign. Hiss! Luonan's mind returned to his main body, and he drew in a breath of cold air. He was cut in half. Ever since Wang pulled him into the framework of the altar of the scales of truth, he had been unable to get rid of the feeling of restraint. Now this feeling had intensified. His blood and energy were blocked, causing many parts of his body to feel numb. His control over his body had dropped substantially. In contrast, his internal organs, which lacked sensory nerves, seemed to have rebelled. The diffuse sensation of pain caused many of his internal organs to convulse. This caused Luonan's body to begin to tremble lightly. In the end, he even began to sway. On the AR interface, at least 7 or 8 diagrams simultaneously displayed the color of blood red, signifying danger. The whispers and conversations within the vehicle were swept clean in an instant. All that was left were the beeping sounds of the instrument's alarm, rising and falling, interweaving together. Internal organ dysfunction. Hold him up. Bai Xinyan's command rang out, but it soon faded away. This was because at this very moment, a lava-like heat poured down from the top of Luonan's head. His brain seemed to be boiling, and it was as if someone had given him a heavy punch. His mind was dizzy and his consciousness was dazed. His mental senses lost their accuracy, and his clairvoyance became blurry and indistinct. His headquarters had actually been raided. Luonan did his best to calm his mind, hoping to recover his clarity of mind. But even though his thoughts were a mess, he knew that Wang had certainly used the scales of truth and the enormous cocoon of light that had just been erected. That old fellow had really struck Luonan's weak spot in an instant. This wouldn't do. Luonan felt the incorporeal net on his body rapidly tighten. It had already bound his body tightly, and it traced all the way up. It wanted to completely seal off all of the transformations of his body and soul. When that happened, he would truly be waiting for death. The unforeseen event happened too suddenly. Luonan had no time to consider anything else. Before the incorporeal net was about to close, Luonan completely obeyed his instincts. He visualized the formatting pagoda and commanded the wraith sign to exert force. Amidst the trembling of the chains, Luonan's soul left his body and ascended. He took a step into the depths of the mental plane. The incorporeal net closed, but it was a step too late. In the instant his soul left his body, Luonan could clearly hear the snapping sounds of tree branches snapping. There was also quite a bit of resistance present. Fortunately, his method of leaving his body was to borrow external force. It was close to being rough, directly charging into the depths of the mental plane. Otherwise, he might not have been able to succeed in one go. As for now, Luonan's mind suddenly became clear after his body and soul separated. His mental senses stabilized once more. The most miraculous thing was that the feeling of pain in his main body instantly disappeared by quite a bit. Yes, and Wang had used the blessing of the Shield of Truth to make an issue out of it. Luonan had forcibly left his body, breaking the mode of interference between the mental and the material. Naturally, he had broken free of the shackles. He was no longer restricted by them. It was just that nothing could ever be perfect. Though he had dodged a calamity, he had lost control of his main body. Before he could lay down, he fell backward and directly fell into Zhang Yingying's embrace. He lost all sensation. The carriage was in a flurry of activity. The situation looked as if Luonan was about to breathe his last in the blink of an eye. Luonan could not care about what would happen to his main body next. Though he had broken Wang's plan, it was still impossible for him to completely break free from this vortex. As long as the conflict between the altar frame and the scales of truth and the formatting pagoda were still entangled, it was impossible for him to truly remain uninvolved. Right now, the results of Luonan's escape were directly reflected on the projection of the scales of truth within the so-called holy space. The formatting pagoda still existed, but it had faded quite a bit. More importantly, the state of warping and melting had reversed, returning it to a complete state. This change was neither too big nor too small, but it directly disturbed the balanced state of fusion between chaos and order. The growth of the branches within the cocoon of light came to a halt. Some of them even withered in an instant. Chapter 253. Aya. Jing Xiao could not help but sigh. Those who were still paying attention to the cocoon of light, the changes in the holy space, were all people with discerning eyes. The minute changes inside could not be hidden from anyone. He knew that Wang had not tricked him lightly, but they were of the same order, so he unconsciously leaned to the side. He was a clear-sworn first ablatum. He was familiar with the classics and knew how valuable the holy space, represented by the cocoon of light, was. When they had set up the evolution field, the external magic arrays were similar in shape. However, upon closer inspection, they were merely mechanical imitations. The current holy space was a domain formed by the holy object after achieving an exquisite balance. When the holy space was set up, the objects that achieved balance, whether it was chaos or order, would become sacrifices for the exchange. They would become the stepping stones to the extraordinary domain. This was the true path to the heavens of the one-step extraordinary. The order of justice viewed the holy space as the mother of the Holy Spirit. As long as the sacrifices on the scales of truth could make up for the consumption, even an extraordinary could be born from nothing. At the very least, every generation of first ablatums had achieved this through the great exchange of the holy space. They represented the blessing and supreme authority of the holy object. It was by relying on this inconceivable power that the order of justice was able to maintain a steady increase in the number of high-level experts for the past 40 years. They were able to spread their teachings to the entire world and become one of the three great secret orders. Jing Xiao pondered. And Wang's fleshly body was completely destroyed. There was a 70 to 80% chance that he would use this technique to reconstruct his fleshly body, the so-called Holy Spirit body. This was also the most common use of the Great Exchange. 09 small say net, if he succeeded, the order of justice would gain another extraordinary. Although the price he paid tonight was disastrous, it was still worth it. However, there was a flaw now. There was a problem at the root. Even if the body was successfully reconstructed, the so-called extraordinary could no longer be mentioned. It was a huge loss. The withering of the branches continued. Even though a considerable portion was growing to make up for the gap, the phenomenon of withering and flourishing could not be eliminated in a short period of time. What was even more fatal was that with this delay, Ouyang Chen had already broken through the final obstruction of the shadow pillar. He stood outside the cocoon of light, within reach. Although the holy space had endless wondrous uses, it was never a sturdy barrier. No matter what, it could not withstand the attack of an extraordinary. Jing Xiao closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. Wang, are you there? A strange greeting suddenly sounded. Jing Xiao opened his eyes in astonishment. He saw Ouyang Chen standing outside the cocoon of light. He stretched out his hand and lightly knocked on the cocoon's outer shell, as if he was a guest who had come to pay a visit. He was polite and courteous. Although the sound was a bit loud, it could still be clearly heard hundreds of meters away. The cocoon of light was silent. There was no response. Seeing this, Ouyang Chen muttered to himself for a while. Then he increased the strength of his fingers and pressed against the outer layer of the light cocoon. With the increase in strength, the outer shell of the light cocoon clearly sank, and the texture became obvious. It looked like a raw egg that had been peeled off and left with its membrane. It was translucent and could be pierced by a finger at any time. In the end, the holy space was not a raw egg. Under the influence of external stimuli, its feedback exceeded everyone's expectations. The cocoon of light was cramping like a living thing, like an enormous heart. The branches and veins inside broke out of the wall and spread out. The shadows, which had already faded away, gathered from the periphery. They came into contact with the veins, and it was as if they had been injected with fresh blood. They came alive in an instant, layer upon layer, pouncing over to cover the cocoon of light, causing it to retreat into the depths of the shadows. At the same time, the logic world rumbled and shook. The enormous shadow pillar that had been smashed into the ground was uprooted and contracted upwards. Dark clouds and turbid mists surged like waves, assaulting one's face and causing one's heart to feel stifled. Like this? Jing Xiao was a bit stunned, and a thought fiercely came to mind. Wrong. This isn't the forging of the Holy Spirit body at all. He's repeating his previous actions. He wants to control. Just like controlling the human-faced arachnid, and one clearly wanted to use the power of the enormous shadow pillar and even the demon behind the scenes as a vessel for his soul to reside in. He wanted to achieve complete control. However, the consequences of Luo Nan's escape were showing themselves. The sound of thunder exploded. It was the roar of the demon behind the shadow pillar. Luo Nan did not reverse En Weng's direction, but the instantaneous change he created reduced the upper limits of En Weng's control. The enormous shadow pillar was uprooted halfway and cracked apart with a hum. Dark shadow clouds pervaded everywhere, flooding the entire logic world. No one could dodge them. What was the difference between this and receiving an attack from a demon? Zheng Zhao's face turned green. He summoned his last bit of strength to instantly cast an incantation, erecting a transparent barrier around his body. He blocked the first wave of the shadow cloud's corrosion. However, not everyone was as lucky as him. The priests and knights of the order were enveloped by the black mist. It was as if they had been corroded by poisonous flames. Dark flames instantly ignited, and they were burned to ashes in a few breaths of time. These people had died unjustly, but they had fainted from the impact. After all, they did not suffer any pain. The ones who suffered the most were the Ablatum Knights. The corrosive attack of the shadow cloud was one thing, but what they faced was no longer an external threat. Instead, it was the shackles that had taken root in the depths of their bodies and souls over the years. They were the vessels for the magical power of the first Ablatums. This was also the source of their power. Right now, En Weng's power was being channeled through this channel, giving them a boost that was completely out of control. The power of the demon's rampage far surpassed the limits of what they could endure. Muffled explosions rang out in the corner of the building. Foul blood blossomed. Several Ablatum Knights exploded one after another. At this point, the elite forces of the Order of Justice in Xia City were practically wiped out. 6 muffled explosions rang out in a row. Baze, who was just about to climb up to the rooftop, suddenly froze. His powerful body suddenly swelled up. His bones and muscles creaked and groaned. Just like that, he staggered up to the ruins of the rooftop that had already collapsed. It looked as if he would explode at any moment, but in the end, his powerful talent and the toughness of his fleshly body far surpassed that of the other Ablatum Knights. Baze opened his mouth with great effort. His originally snow-white teeth were already soaked in blood. He roared with a hoarse voice. Fairchild. Fairchild, who was standing on the other side of the building, turned around when he heard the roar. Baze's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. He was already in a half-blind state, but he was still able to miraculously lock onto Fairchild's position. He roared once more and charged up. Baze only needed 2 steps to traverse a distance of several dozen meters. He smashed out with his fist. The already dim mercury-like radiance sputtered. The shield of truth was broken in one strike, and Fairchild's majestic body was blasted into the air. Baze chased after Fairchild at an even faster speed, bombarding him with a series of heavy punches. Die, 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 die. Baze's roar was devoid of any killing intent. It was just a venting of extreme pain. In the end, he simply tore apart all pretenses. Kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, come and kill me. The twisting tendons were like living snakes. They wandered around Baze's body, giving him absolute power. But at the same time, pain and despair were branded within. Chapter 254. Child did not say a word. He was purely defending. At this time, his shield of truth had been broken, and he no longer had the almost absolute defense ability. Baze, who had been forced to break through his limits, had fists that were sharper and more terrifying than any axe, hammer, or knife. They constantly tore apart Child's robe and flesh, bringing with them a thin layer of blood mist. Even so, Child was not knocked down by Baze. Even if the power of chaos continued to attack and erode him, there was still a fundamental order that always existed. No physical structure could compare to it. Baze punched again, forcibly blasting away Child's raised arm. The force of the punch penetrated Child's chest and into his lungs, crushing Child's chest until it visibly caved in. Child did not dodge. He used a hand bind and locked Baze's joints. The two of them instantly entered a more dangerous close combat. First, 2 heads collided with each other. In an instant, both sides were covered in blood. This collision also forced Baze's ferocious teeth back. Child was still holding onto Baze's elbow joint. Borrowing the force of the other party's charge and retreat, he pulled outwards, forcibly twisting Baze up and smashing him heavily into the rubble. But then he was also knocked over by the brute force of Baze. The strength of the two humanoid beasts was terrifying. Under the force of the collision, the floor under the rubble could no longer withstand it. Even the steel frame collapsed with a loud bang. The two of them fell together, and their heads and faces were covered by the rubble above. But even so, in the narrowest space they did not stop. Instead, they continuously hit each other's face, chest, and waist. The colliding shock waves swept away the rubble, avoiding the result of being buried. But before they landed on the ground, both of them were already vomiting blood. No matter how injured he was, Child remained as cold as iron. The opportunity he had been waiting for finally arrived after Baze's two unreserved waves of attacks. At the cost of another heavy elbow strike on his chest, he took advantage of the gap left by Baze's overexertion and performed a joint technique, forcefully twisting Baze's left elbow joint. Then he took a heavy hit on his head and broke Baze's right shoulder. At this point, both of Baze's arms were broken. But even so, Baze was like a mad tiger. Ignoring his shattered shoulder and dislocated joints, he stood up and continued to fight. However, his rapidly declining athletic ability was no longer enough to support this kind of fighting style. Fairchild pulled away and delivered a series of combination punches, hitting Baze's chin, ears, and other vital points, concussing his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. Finally, Fairchild kicked Baze's lower abdomen, temporarily dispersing the inner chi he had lost control of. Boom! Baze was sent flying and smashed into a distorted pillar. A large amount of earth and rocks fell down and covered his body. In the end, he struggled to get up, but he still roared and screamed. Pure chaos and ruthlessness tormented the strongest man in Xia City to the point where he was neither human nor ghost. Fairchild panted slightly. As soon as he adjusted his breathing, he said, "Help!" His voice was low and it did not travel far. When he spoke, the area within a 20-meter radius around him was filled with dark clouds. Aside from the struggling Baze, there was no one alive. However, a mere 2 seconds after his voice fell, Fairchild's chest glowed with a faint light. The tetrahedron format pyramid was half embedded in the juncture between his chest and abdomen. It helped him adjust his energy and blood, alleviating his injuries. Fairchild extended his hand and adjusted his broken ribs. Some of them had already pierced into his internal organs, causing him to bleed. But as a powerful being who was only a step away from becoming an extraordinary, such injuries were far from fatal. After the broken ribs were pulled out and reset, the self-repair function of his internal organs began to display its effect. He retained at least 50 to 60% of his combat strength. Of course, the standard of comparison was in a state without the support of the Shield of Truth. There's still him. Fairchild extended his hand and pointed at Baze. Are you sure? Luo Nan's consciousness cut in from the mental plane. Fairchild had contacted Luo Nan through the order imprint that Luo Nan had projected earlier. This also showed that Luo Nan's existence in the logic world was no secret to a powerful being like Fairchild. He can still be saved, Fairchild replied calmly. I feel that you can do it. All right. With just a few words, all the pressure had been thrown onto Luo Nan's body. Of course, Fairchild knew that he was not answering Luo Nan's question. He explained, aside from Enwang, the Order of Order has some prospects in Xia City. Ian Jingxiao. You need to preserve some of your vitality. Well, Luo Nan had nearly forgotten that Fairchild was a member of the Order of Justice. Even though he was an executioner of the truth side who was as incompatible as fire and water with the secular side, he was also a fanatical believer of the Order of Justice. It was hard to fathom Fairchild's current feelings in a situation where the Order of Justice had suffered such disastrous casualties. But thinking about it, Fairchild was far from being happy. As for Enwang, Luo Nan did not finish his sentence, but his meaning was very clear. Was this the time to consider preserving some of his vitality? The giant shadow pillar was rising endlessly. Enwang's plans and methods were already as clear as day. The demon behind the scenes was far too powerful. If Enwang could truly create a miracle and use the scales of truth and the holy space to control the demon in one fell swoop, then the people of the logic world would probably be purged once more. You're thinking too much, Fairchild responded simply. It's not your turn to interfere in a battle between extraordinaries. This was the standard truth, leaving Luo Nan speechless. He sighed soundlessly and no longer spoke nonsense. He gave Baze the support of the format pyramid. Compared to Fairchild's immediate effect, Baze's situation was not going smoothly. Right now the inside of the black man's body was a mess. External and internal injuries were secondary. What was truly troublesome was the chaos element that had been forcefully poured into his body. This was a crude replacement. It was as if the chaos essence of the human-faced arachnid had been forcefully stuffed in, replacing all the functions of a human body. The fact that Baze's body did not explode on the spot only proved that Baze's body was tough to an inconceivable degree. It was useless to know the cause of the disease. Baze's chaotic essence had already fused deeply with Baze's after the previous frenzied assault. It was like a cup of water that had been soaked in ink. No matter how clear it was impossible for it to return to its original state. What's more, the amount of ink was greater than the cup of water itself. This was probably what it meant when the disease was beyond cure. Luonan switched to clairvoyance mode. He was no longer able to draw out Baze's constellation diagram if he used the life sketch method to observe. He could only draw something closer to the human-faced arachnid's dark clouds and shadows. In a certain sense, the current Baze could no longer be called a human. The chaotic essence of a demon had already deeply replaced Baze's original functions. This person should have died long ago, but he was still alive. Baze's powerful fleshly body and his crumbling internal foundation were mixed together to form this extremely special case. Chapter 255. Luonan's mental senses swept Baze inside out. The more he looked, the greater the pressure. The more he looked, the more he did not know what to do. For a time, his mind was filled with resentment toward Wang. That Wang. He didn't want to be a person, but he also conveniently tricked his own subordinate. Fine, Wang did not care about this at all. He was wholeheartedly working on the demon behind the shadows. You can save him. Fairchild repeated similar words. His confidence far exceeded Luonan's. How can I save him? Luonan did not need to pretend to communicate with Fairchild. He responded in a bad mood. His heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys are all unreliable. All of his functions are in chaos. They are all for the sake of accumulating the most explosive power. The verbal information suddenly stopped here. The efficiency of the exchange of information on the mental plane far exceeded that of a regular conversation. Fairchild understood Luonan's confusion and difficulties. Luonan also roughly understood Fairchild's train of thought. He even used more concise and accurate words to express himself. Build an order frame for him and restrain him? Just like that. Fairchild's train of thought was only a general idea. It originated from the feeling of order he received on the mental plane back at Frost River reality. Now that Luonan had added the finishing touch, Fairchild immediately praised, "Order frame. This description is very good." Of course it was good. Right now, Wang was doing this. Yes, there was also Luonan himself. Through the conflict with Wang on the altar frame, Luonan gained a new understanding of many things that were previously fuzzy and unclear. Altar and sacrificial offering represented a kind of order. The essence of demons was indeed chaos, but it was chaos that was controlled by a certain order. There needed to be a large frame above the chaos. Otherwise, it would be chaos that was completely meaningless. The human-faced arachnid was the best example. The Wraith Sign's many successful sacrificial offerings proved that this kind of chaotic existence could be accommodated within a high level of order. This was the only way to explain how a Darksider life form, which acted completely by instinct, could use efficient methods to make correct choices most of the time. The current Baze was a humanoid demon. Although it was a bit nondescript, there was no difference in essence. It would naturally be extremely difficult to make him return to his human state. However, it seemed feasible to just maintain it, or even take it a step further. Luonan pondered for a moment before saying, "If you don't mind this state, you might be able to preserve your life. But this will completely change the foundation. Is there any meaning to it?" Fairchild shook his head slightly. He looked down at Baze, who was panting violently. The man's features were twisted from the pain, and his black face was stained with dirt and blood. Even his mouth was no exception. He looked as ferocious as a ghost. Sensing Fairchild's gaze, Baze's half-protruding eyes met Fairchild's. However, his pupils were dilated and no longer focused, making him look even more terrifying. The skin that bore this terrifying and hideous face was rapidly turning gray. The strength of its struggle was getting weaker and weaker, and it was also getting stiffer and stiffer. It looked like the last bit of its life could be extinguished at any time. For living beings, the essence of chaos was infinitely equal to death. On the other hand, if there was life, then its essence might not be pure chaos. There was always a glimmer of hope. "Make your move," Fairchild replied. Luonan didn't say anything more. The radiance of the format pyramid grew brighter and brighter at Baze's chest. This represented that Luonan's order was affecting Baze. However, a simple blessing from the format pyramid was not enough. He still needed a more direct and efficient method. Luonan needed some reference, but his consciousness had just walked around the altar frame. Information that came from the depths of the mental plane caused his consciousness to deviate a bit. He was a bit distracted. And Wang's control over the demon behind the scenes seemed to have reached a new level. Ouyang Chen had already been completely driven out of the giant shadow pillar. Ouyang Chen was speeding up his departure from the logic world. "Focus," Fairchild warned him. His meaning was clear: don't touch what you shouldn't touch. Don't force yourself. Luonan understood Fairchild's meaning. However, the altar frame was entangled on a level like this. It was not something he could do even if he wanted to stay out of it. In reality, as Luonan exerted his influence on Baze, his entanglement with Wang floated to the surface once more. And Wang did not pay attention to Baze, but Luonan had constructed an order frame to deal with the essence of chaos. It was a part of the demon that Wang had just stripped off. As a result, Luonan's level of tracing back inevitably came into contact with Wang's scales of truth frame. The hidden connection was instantly highlighted. And Wang and Luonan met once more. This was not a happy meeting. Instead, it was a collision, conflict, and pursuit between two order frames on a higher level. Oh, there was also President Ouyang Chen. His mental senses had come to join in on the fun. This was the first time Luonan clearly sensed the existence of this president, but it soon blurred away. The reason was that he was quite far away. It was like a diving competition. Luonan and Wang both had clear directions to reach their destination. Ouyang Chen's diving depth was certainly not inferior to theirs, but he was unfamiliar with the underwater environment. He spent too much energy searching for his target, and he was left far behind by the cheating duo. In the end, Ouyang Chen simply got lost. There was no need to talk about anything else. It was precisely because Ouyang Chen was left behind that Wang shifted most of the energy he had placed on Ouyang Chen to Luonan. He scanned Luonan over and over again, paying extreme attention. And Wang could not be blamed for doing this. Right now, the holy space was deep within the giant shadow pillar. It was attempting to control the demon, but it was not completely successful. Luonan traced it back through the chaos element on Baze's body. They occupied different sizes inside and outside, but their levels were the same. Then the problem came: 2 frames, 2 elements, 2 directions. There was only one demon behind the scenes. Who did it listen to? It didn't want to listen to anyone. A restless roar penetrated through countless curtains into the logic world. The berserk power urged the dark clouds of shadow. The vortex seemed to have substance, corroding and tearing apart everything it covered. Dust filled the sky, and the 3 buildings swayed even more violently. Such a reaction allowed Luonan to confirm one step further. Perhaps the demon behind the scenes was thousands of times more powerful than the human-faced arachnid, but they were essentially the same goods. This fellow's reaction was practically the same as the burning wraith on the warship a dozen or so days ago, the previous incarnation of the wraith sign. They were both helpless when faced with this situation. The powerful instincts nurtured within their chaos could only be accomplished under a higher plane of order frame. Once this order frame encountered an attack, it would be more delightful to be captured without putting up a fight. Right now, Wang was pursuing the specific hierarchical structure of this order frame. He was simulating and overlapping in order to realize control over the demon. And Wang had a clear direction. This was probably a hint given to him by the holy space. But Luonan had one as well. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.